Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the September 7th, 2017 meeting of the City of Bellingham Planning Commission. We have a lot of people tonight, which is great, but I want to make sure that everybody has electronic devices silenced. If you're taking notes on a laptop or surfing the net on your phone or whatever you're doing, just please make sure it's on silent. And that'll allow us to kind of make sure that everybody can hear, that we're not interrupted, that we can move through the meeting in a timely fashion, because there's going to be a lot to cover. Heather, will you please call the roll?
Phyllis McKee. Here. Steve Crooks.
Here.
Mike Estes.
Here.
Holly Taishi.
Here.
Karen O'Brien.
Here.
Iris Mahdi Gibson. Here. Lisa Anderson. Here.
Thank you. Okay, so before we get into the bulk of the meeting, we'll have some housekeeping stuff. We have one set of minutes that are from our August 3rd meeting, which was a discussion of the Whatcom Community College Institutional Master Plan. And I think everybody's seen those, so unless there's a comment, we just head nod around that minutes are approved. And Steve, I know you weren't absent, so on your participation. Oh, you were as well, yeah, I'm sorry. So everybody okay with that? Okay, so August 3rd minutes are approved. Okay, so tonight we are going to have a work session on accessory dwelling unit ordinance, amendments to the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Before that work session, we are going to provide a public comment period, which we always do, for people to talk about anything else other than the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, the topic of tonight's meeting. So if you want to speak about general community issues or whatever comes to mind unrelated to the topic, please feel free to come to the mic and speak for 3 minutes. We want to be fair to everybody, so if your comments are related to this topic, we'd like you to wait. We will have an opportunity for public comment. There's a lot of people signed up, so we will give everyone a chance to talk. That's going to occur at the end of the meeting. This is a work session. It's slightly different than a public hearing, which is really the focus is to hear the public at that meeting. This is a work session. We'll have, I think Greg will speak to this, but we'll have a couple meetings before we get to a public hearing. So in those situations, we have a staff presentation, we have a discussion amongst the commission members, then we take comment at the end, because the focus of the meeting is our time to discuss the topic. And so that's just kind of a framework. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for our general public comment. If anyone has anything they'd like to talk about other than tonight's topic, you can come down to the microphone. We'll give you a few minutes to share your thoughts with us. Sir? If there's more people, you can always come down and line up against the wall over there. And please share your name and address with us when you come to the microphone.
My name is Howard Hill Cummings. I live at 1517 Texas Street, number 24. I am here representing the Resident Action Project, the Cascade Volunteer Advocates, the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, and many other services here with the Opportunity Council and other things that I'm involved in. So off topic, I just want to I wonder, and it's a question, I know you don't answer questions, but we need, as a general public, to be involved in these issues. And I am wondering how we get involved. And that's what the Resident Action Project is all about. I brought you some brochures.
Thank you.
So we, as people who have experienced these things, who are living these things, we need a place at the table, and I'm glad that we're having these work groups and we are here, because we need to have the voices of those who are being affected the most by these issues. I have lived in Whatcom County for almost 3 decades. I cannot live here anymore without subsidies. I cannot live here anymore without any rules and decisions. And in my opinion, it's becoming a plutocracy. People like me who live on a fixed income, there's no affordability in housing, and I'll just stop right there, because I hope you continue to involve us and hear the voices of those who are actually experiencing this stuff and actually need. And you know what? I've lived here for 30 years. I live on disability, but I have to leave if I can't find an apartment, which I probably can't, because of my voucher system, because of my subsidies. We have to make this an inclusive community for everyone, whether they are rich or poor.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment on anything unrelated to tonight's meeting? right. Seeing no one, we will close the public comment portion of the meeting, and we're going to move into our work session. And like I mentioned, the work session is on our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. This is really our first meeting in a sense. We had a meeting or two a couple years ago, I believe, and I'm sure staff will kind of walk through the history, but it's been a long time, so we're kind of starting over in terms of the presentation of information and the public engagement process. So I think we'll start with staff presentation, and like I mentioned, we're going to have a commission discussion, and then we'll provide an opportunity for public comment. We're going to, Greg's going to talk about this, but we're going to have another meeting on this. We're not going to carry this meeting past 10 p.m. tonight. So, and we're going to try and wrap our discussion at a point where we're going to provide the public opportunity to comment. But we may limit, depending on how the discussion goes, we may limit the amount of time you have to comment tonight. Be aware that there will be another opportunity to comment, and if we need more time after that for public comment, we can schedule that. So I don't want anyone to feel like this is your only chance, and we're going to play this by ear in terms of the opportunity. We will give everybody a chance, but it may be limited depending on how the discussion goes, and then we'll have more opportunity after that. I just want everyone to be aware of that up front. We'll try and be real fair about that. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris Cook, or Greg Ockett. Sorry,
Yeah,
Greg,
actually,
you want to take
I'll
it away?
start. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for navigating the City Hall construction zone. As the chairman stated, this is the work session. It's the first of a series of meetings that we'll be having on the update to the ADU ordinance. So again, we want people to be able to participate in the process. We'll have a public hearing at some point, maybe more than one if one is needed. So everyone will get a chance to speak at some point. We always accept written comments throughout the process. So if you don't get a chance to speak, if you can't make it to a meeting, you have comments, submit them to us. We'll provide those to the Planning Commission and create a record that goes on eventually to the City Council. And that's another important point, I think. The Planning Commission is a recommending body. They review ordinances like this, and they make recommendations to the City Council. The council will hold at least one public hearing and also a series of work sessions, and ultimately it's the City Council who decides what the final form of the ADU ordinance will be. With me tonight is Chris Cook of our staff, and Kurt Nabafeld is here as well. Rick Sepler sends along his apologies. He could not be here tonight. He had a death in the family today, and so he will not be here. I would anticipate that he'll be at the next meeting. He feels very strongly about this issue and really wanted to be here, but circumstances just wouldn't allow. Chris is going to go through the staff report. Hopefully we can get through that fairly quickly. As the chairman stated, the primary purpose of this meeting is for the commission to understand sort of where we've been on this issue and what the staff proposal looks like, and to ask questions of staff, to seek additional information if necessary for a follow-up meeting. We will take public comment as time allows. We hope we can do that tonight, but as I said, if not tonight, other nights there will be that opportunity. So if there are no other procedural items, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, thank you. And unfortunately, the overhead projectors, only one is working. Normally we'd have three on the walls up here, but this is what we have to work with tonight. There's a staff report that was published online, and one attachment from that, attachment 2, that consists of a summary of changes proposed by staff. We made a number of copies of that. Those are at the front up here, so if you want a copy. We only made 50 copies, and so we handed out a number of them earlier, so there should be a number dispersed through the crowd, so if you see somebody with one, you can share those also. So tonight, what we're going to cover is what is an accessory dwelling unit, otherwise known as, abbreviated as accessory or ADU. Going to look at ADU opportunities and concerns. Why are we reviewing this now? What is being considered for update? Take a quick look at the existing standards, and again, the proposed changes, and then what are the next steps. So first, what is an accessory dwelling unit? An accessory dwelling unit is essentially a fully self-contained dwelling unit that's subordinate to and on the same lot as a primary residence. And so in being subordinate to, it's subordinate in size and appearance, and that accessory dwelling unit can take a number of forms, whether it's attached to the primary residence or detached. It can be in a garage or an addition to a primary residence, or when it's detached, it can be just a standalone accessory dwelling unit, or it can be something like a carriage unit above a garage. Other common names for them are granny flats, in-law suites, secondary units, and so on. In the early 20th century, these were a very common feature in single-family homes as a means of providing income for extended families living together, and so on and so forth. As zoning was adopted after World War II, suburbanization took place, zoning was adopted, and zoning where there was separation of uses was prevalent. Basically, trying to separate multifamily from single family, from commercial, and with the prosperity and development that took place after World War II, you had the baby boom, you had the car boom, you had the interstate system that was built out. Basically, it promoted sprawl and less interest in the efficient use of space. And so one of the things that was zoned out as part of this was accessory dwelling units, this ability to be able to provide a supplemental income to a property owner, to provide extended family living so that families can live together with grandparents and so forth, and you can take care of your family, your extended family. Again, some examples are attached accessory dwelling units, such as the one on the upper left-hand corner. On the right is a detached accessory dwelling unit. It's primarily a ground-oriented unit with living space on the ground floor. It could have a loft with a bedroom upstairs. Third example at the bottom is a carriage unit design where the unit is more or less entirely above a garage. As far as opportunities that are identified with accessory dwelling units, we worked with a couple of groups. One, a focus group we've had a number of meetings with, and also a technical group. The focus group was made up of a number of community interest groups such as architects, designers, neighborhood representatives. We had neighborhoods represented from post-World War II, developed neighborhoods, pre-World War II, developed neighborhoods, large lot neighborhoods such as Birchwood neighborhood. So we tried to get a good mix of different neighborhood types and representatives from each. Also, we had housing groups represented from Colston Community Land Trust, the Housing Authority, the Real Estate Association, so forth, the Building Industry Association. So we tried to get a really good representation of interest groups and held a focus group meetings where we were asking them to identify opportunities and concerns that they have with accessory dwelling units, and to come together on, you know, what are common things that everybody agrees on. And so a number of the opportunities that were identified is that accessory dwelling units provide housing choice. They allow for people to live in the neighborhood and stay within a neighborhood, whether they are in their early years, they buy a home, and they rent out the accessory dwelling unit. And then as they age, their kids move out of the house, they're empty nesters, they have the ability to then supplement their income with the accessory dwelling units, or they can move into that accessory dwelling unit. They can downsize since they don't have children living with them. They don't have a need for all the space, and they can rent out the primary residence and live in the ADU. They, again, provide financial benefits to the homeowner, allow them to offset their mortgage. They provide new investment in existing neighborhoods. They do provide for housing affordability. Not in all cases, but in many cases, they provide an ability to allow family members to live on site, in many cases for free. Again, you can have an extended family with seniors, your grandparents and such, that they can live there. They provide for a caretaker function so that as somebody ages in place, they're able to have a caretaker live on the property. They're able to stay in the neighborhood. They provide jobs for construction workers. They're a housing form that needs less parking than standard housing. Because they are infill development, they tend to go into places where the infrastructure, transportation infrastructure is built out. You have bus routes nearby, you have sidewalks developed, you have street parking available. And so in many cases, parking is not as necessary. And then it provides fiscal benefits to the city in that in providing infill development, they're using existing infrastructure. There's no additional infrastructure being built for additional housing that's, promoting more sprawl. And also, basically I'll leave it at that with the fiscal benefits. Next, we'll cover some of the concerns that were identified about accessory dwelling units. One is the impacts on neighborhood character, that if too many are built, they could impact the character and quality of the neighborhood. Great concern is illegal units and subsequent enforcement on those units. Short-term vacation rentals, the prevalence of vacation rental by owner and Airbnb and all these new online rental allowances that would basically promote a lot of transient housing within a neighborhood that it decreases the ability to get to know your neighbor if they're not your neighbor. They're just there for a day or a few days. Concerns about parking and traffic. There's design issues concerning compatibility between the existing home and the ADU, and also compatibility within the neighborhood itself. Concerns about overfill, that again, if too many of these are built, is there too much infill occurring? With the development of ADUs, whether addition to a home or a detached ADU, there's that potential loss of green space, trees, and so on and so forth. There's a fear of loss of privacy with greater population that would occupy the ADUs. Concern identified was the cost to build and permit accessory dwelling units. There is a great cost in the permit process with that. And also a concern about public services, the adequacy of fire, parks, police, so on and so forth, to be able to serve this added population. So why are we reviewing this now? When the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, the first one, was first adopted in 1995, it required review of the existing regulations upon the 200th ADU built within the city, or upon 20 units being allowed in any one neighborhood. We're at that point right now with the South Hill neighborhood. They have 20 units that have been approved. Not all of them have been built yet, but 20 have been approved. Otherwise, citywide, in 22 years, 107 have been approved, 93 are completed, 4 under construction, 10 pending building permit issuance right now. This is the dispersion of those that have been approved, or basically of all those that have been approved or are in review right now. So this shows all those units. You can see the concentration in the South Hill area, which is west of the university. Otherwise, no other neighborhood has, say, more than, I believe, 12 accessory dwelling units. Also, when we look at the demographics, baby boomers began retiring in 2011. Our population is aging, and so you can see here from the chart on the right, in 2000, the age group of 55 to 59 was 2,400. In 213, that had increased substantially to basically 4,600. And again, for the age group of 60 to 64, that, I believe, more than doubled. So that is representing the baby boomer generation. And again, as they retire, as they look to downsize, as they start seeing the need for greater medical attention, accessory dwelling units become more attractive to provide for that caretaker opportunity in order to stay in your neighborhood, and also for the extended family living.
Yeah, excuse me, Chris, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Up in the gallery, we have about 10 seats available. Could I ask everybody to move to your left and generate some seats near the opening up there, so some of these people standing and sitting down below could get some seating, please?
Thank you, Steve. That's a good idea, Steve. Thank you. You don't have to sit. It's just an opportunity. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so again, continuing on the demographics, we are a university town. We have a large population of students. And for the last few decades, we have this shrinking household size where at this time there is 70% of Bellingham households consist of only 1 to 2 people. And so again, accessory dwelling units being small, typically studio 1 and 2 bedroom, they become very attractive to this population. So you have students, you have millennials, basically you have a low-income families, you have in-migration. There's a lot of opportunities for this housing beside just the baby boomers that, you know, would be aging in place. Also, why we're reviewing it now is we adopted the Rental Registration and Safety Inspection Program in 2015, and this is helping us to identify illegal units out there and be able to plan accordingly on how to address those. Also, with adoption of the comprehensive plan in 2016, that set basically new policy guidance on how to look at accessory dwelling units in the city and how to accommodate them. Specifically, I added these comp plan goals and policies. First one, land use, from the land use chapter, is to protect the unique character and qualities of existing neighborhoods while identifying opportunities for improving livability, safety, and housing affordability and diversity. Housing policy 9, update the city's accessory dwelling unit ordinance with priorities on evaluating and inventorying ADUs in the city, identifying appropriate areas for detached ADUs, improving permitting and enforcement, and requiring owner occupancy in single-family zones. Housing Policy 10, permit owner-occupied attached ADUs in single-family and multifamily zones. And Community Design Policy 33, encourage the construction of innovative small-scale housing types that fit the context of single-family neighborhoods, such as accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, co-housing, townhouses, zero-lot line homes, and small-lot housing. So with this update, we're looking at analyzing the current regulations for both attached and detached accessory dwelling units. Our code, we adopted initial accessory dwelling unit code in 1995. That was allowing attached accessory dwelling units. In 2009, we adopted the infill toolkit, and that allowed detached accessory dwelling units in multifamily zoned areas. Basically, it prohibited them in most single-family zones. So I'm going to cover what the existing accessory dwelling unit standards are, just to give you an idea of what they are, and then follow that with what we're proposing as far as changes. Some standards that are common to both attached and detached ADUs. They're only allowed in conjunction with single-family homes, and you're only allowed one ADU per single-family home. Basically, you can only have one single-family home on a lot, and so there's no way that you could have multiple ADUs on a single lot. The maximum size of the ADU is 40% of the size of the primary residence, or 800 square feet, whichever is less. So if you have a 1,000 square foot home, you could only have a 400 square foot accessory dwelling unit. Again, it requires that the owner live on site. We require a covenant of owner occupancy be recorded on the property, and we verify the owner occupancy every odd year. And for both attached and detached, we have design standards adopted to ensure compatibility between the primary residence and the accessory dwelling unit. Standards that are unique to attached accessory dwelling units, again, those were adopted in 1995. They are allowed in all zones that allow residential uses, so they're allowed in all single-family zoned areas except in the Lake Whatcom watershed. They allow a maximum of 2 bedrooms. They allow a maximum of 3 occupants, and they do require 1 parking stall per bedroom. So if you have a 2-bedroom accessory dwelling unit, it requires 2 parking spaces. In 2009, we adopted standards allowing detached accessory dwelling units. Again, they are prohibited in most single-family zoned areas. Otherwise, in other areas zoned multifamily and such, they are allowed. They also are not allowed in the Lake Whatcom watershed, though. They allow a maximum of 500 square feet per floor and a 0.5 floor area ratio on the property for all buildings on the property. The floor area ratio is a ratio of floor area of buildings to the area of the property. So if you have a 5,000 square foot piece of property, a 0.5 FAR means that you can have 2,500 square feet of building or buildings. That would be your primary residence and detached accessory buildings or detached ADU. But again, that would be 2,500 square feet it would allow. Height must be less than or equal to the primary residence and no more than 25 feet, whichever is more restrictive. So if your house is only 20 feet tall, a detached ADU can only be 20 feet tall. The property must have alley access or it must be on a corner lot, or it must consist of at least, actually, it must be greater than 10,000 square feet. So if you meet one of those three criteria, alley access, corner lot, or it's greater than 10,000 square feet, you could have a detached ADU. And with this one being adopted in 2009, there's some more progressive thinking there that it's not promoting use of the auto as much, and just realizing that this is an infill housing form. And so only one parking stall is required per dwelling unit, regardless of how many bedrooms. So some of the changes that we are proposing, we'll cover those next. One is to consolidate standards. Right now, the standards for the attached and detached accessory dwelling units are located in basically 3 places in the code. It leads to confusion, and we're looking to consolidate all those standards into one section of the code. Also, we're looking to standardize regulations and clarify language whenever possible to minimize conflicting standards and improve user friendliness. Second one is to allow for minor modifications. Currently, with detached accessory dwelling units, with the standards adopted for those, there's a provision that allows administrative deviations from the code for certain circumstances. And we're proposing that that be allowed for attached accessory dwelling units also. And then also to write those provisions to be a little more flexible to allow them to be more useful. Third one, where allowed, we're proposing that they be allowed in single-family zoned areas on a per neighborhood basis based on legislative action. And so if a area of the city is zoned single-family residential, and the neighborhood gets together, and it's the neighborhoods, it's initiated by the neighborhood, they're the ones that are promoting it, they're the ones that are bringing it forward. They want to see this happen. They can bring that forward and have that initiated by and reviewed through legislative action. Otherwise, we are not promoting or proposing that this go into any single-family zoned areas. That said, the Happy Valley neighborhood, they approached us early on, about a year ago. They are very interested in allowing detached accessory dwelling units, detached accessory dwelling units in their neighborhood. And they held a pretty extensive process. Let me go. Do an outreach in their neighborhood to promote, to basically to educate and promote detached accessory dwelling units and other infill housing forms. But they're looking to piggyback with the citywide ordinance to allow detached accessory dwelling units in their neighborhood, again, through this legislative process. One of the provisions in the current standards is that no further accessory dwelling units be built citywide if any one neighborhood meets 20 dwelling units. We're looking to remove that provision. We're seeing that with legal accessory dwelling units, we are not having enforcement problems with legally established accessory dwelling units. As far as lot requirements for detached accessory dwelling units, we're proposing that the minimum lot size required for a detached ADU be decreased from basically 10,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet. 5,000 square feet is a common lot size in the neighborhoods, commonly platted lot size, especially in the older neighborhoods And so it create a lot more opportunities for these. Again, attached accessory dwelling units are already allowed regardless of the lot size, and so this is being proposed. And then they would continue to be allowed outright on corner lots and alley lots. As far as the height goes, currently the height limit for detached accessory dwelling units is 25 feet. We're looking to reduce that to 20 feet. Again, these are intended to be subordinate. They're supposed to be lesser in size and scale, mass and bulk than a primary residence. And so 25 feet was allowing a full 2 stories. And we're couching this with currently that 25-foot height limit is allowed, but it's further restricted by the height of the existing residence. So if your existing residence is shorter, it's 20 feet, then it's the more restrictive of the two. What we're proposing is to reduce the height limit to 20 feet, but not restrict it, further restrict it to the height of the primary residence. So if the primary residence is 18 feet tall, you could build an accessory building, this detached ADU, at 20 feet. It's keeping within the scale of 1 to 1.5 stories. As far as the size of the ADU, the maximum 800 square foot size is proposed to be unchanged. And there's also a provision in the code that if you're going to convert an existing split level home to allow a attached ADU, you could convert the entire floor on one level. There's often homes, say in the 60s, 70s, they were built very simplistic boxes. And so to try to carve out a couple hundred feet and restrict it from use would be challenging. So as far as the size, the maximum size of the ADU, we're looking to increase that from 40% to 50% of the size of the primary residence. And when this is being built as a detached accessory dwelling unit, that includes the garage, whatever, as ancillary space that's included with that, that's attached to that detached ADU, that's included in that floor area. Actually, I misspoke. When looking at a detached ADU, actually, sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, I spoke right. That includes the ancillary spaces, but the accessory dwelling unit could not exceed 800 square feet. When you do include ancillary space, such as when you build a carriage unit where the ADU is above a garage, we're looking to maximize efficiency and efficient use of space. And so currently on a property, you can build a detached accessory building up to 800 square feet. And there's no limit to the number of those buildings that you can build on your property, except that you have a 30% lot coverage limitation. So in order to encourage consolidation, so somebody doesn't build a 800 square foot detached accessory dwelling unit and then a separate 400 or 500 square foot garage, we would allow the two to be combined and allow some additional floor area in that building, such that that detached accessory building together could be up to 1,000 square feet. The accessory dwelling unit could not be more than 800 square feet. But again, the building as a whole could not exceed 50% of the size of the primary residence. So there is still that tie to the primary residence. So it's a little bit complicated, but that is one of the proposals. Also with detached accessory dwelling units, the limitation of any one floor being no greater than 500 square feet, we're proposing to eliminate that. Purposes of that is, again, to provide greater allowance of aging in place. So the elderly, if they want 800 square feet on the ground floor for mobility purposes, they can put it entirely at the ground floor. As far as setbacks for detached accessory dwelling units, we're proposing to retain the provision that allows the building to be built up to an alley when an alley is present. The required 10-foot rear yard setback would be decreased to 5 feet, which is the same as a side yard setback. And the rear and side yard setbacks required along a property line, a common property line, could be administratively reduced to 0 in the rear 32 feet of a property when approved with a subdivision or when it's agreed upon by abutting property owners. And so this is actually what is consistent with what is currently allowed for just detached accessory buildings. If you're going to build a garage, a detached garage on your property, you can build in the rear 32 feet up to the property line. And there's no requirement to contact your neighbor or anything. And so this puts in the stipulation that it's agreed upon with your neighbor. And basically allows for greater consistency between existing code. As far as the aesthetic design, basically we'd continue to require design compatibility between the primary residence and the ADU, except that for detached or for attached accessory dwelling units, currently the code requires that a entrance for an accessory dwelling unit not be on the same face as the primary residence to make it truly look like a single-family home. But that often leads to confusion from deliveries, whether it's pizza delivery or emergency services that need to respond to a call or something, trying to find that second door. And so it just creates greater intuitiveness as to what is there, whether to the property owner or to neighbors or those that are making deliveries and such. Bedrooms, we are looking to restrict the number of bedrooms to 2 per ADU to be consistent with the attached accessory dwelling unit ordinance. As far as occupancy, we'd be looking to restrict that to not more than 3 people, again, to be consistent with the existing standards for attached accessory dwelling unit ordinance.
Chris, I think the monitor went to sleep.
Yeah. Heather? The rest of this I can do from here.
Yeah.
So as far as parking goes, oh, wasn't working. Here we go. As far as parking goes, we'd be looking to create consistency between what's allowed for the detached accessory dwelling unit, and that only 1 parking space would be required for the accessory dwelling unit, regardless of the number of bedrooms. And additionally, we would not require parking on site if, in order to create parking on site, you have to put in a curb cut. That's going to eliminate street parking. Street parking, we view that as the most efficient parking there is. As soon as a car leaves, somebody else, that space is available for somebody else. If it's private parking on site, when the person leaves, it remains vacant until the person gets back, whether they're going to work or going on a 2-week vacation. So also, we're looking to add a provision where the planning director could administratively reduce the parking such that in circumstances where a street has parking on both sides and there's ample parking available, they could request a parking waiver. Additionally, if they are on a WTA GO line, whatever justification they can provide to justify that reduced parking. As far as utilities, we're not looking to make changes. Currently, separate meters for utilities are allowed for all of ADUs. So as far as next steps, we'd be looking to conduct this meeting here. Following this meeting, there's potential follow-up Planning Commission work sessions. We'd also be taking the proposal to the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Committee. And then once we get adequate direction from the Planning Commission and such, we'd be looking to put together a draft ordinance and bringing back that ordinance for a public hearing. And again, public testimony on that ordinance is encouraged. Planning Commission would make a recommendation on the proposal, forward that recommendation to City Council, and then City Council would hold their own public hearing on the proposal. And that's it right there. Are there any questions?
I'm sure there will be. Thank you. Okay, everyone, let's give you a hand. You to cheer for Chris. That was good work. I will note, though, at this point that when we do have public comment, everyone needs to refrain from making noises relative to that comment, whether it's in support or in opposition to that comment. We want to be respectful of everybody at that point. But cheering for Chris is surely nice.
Yes.
So thanks, Chris. And Greg, is there anything you want to add, or should we move into some questions and discussion about this?
Let's go ahead and
Okay.
talk.
I'd like to talk about how we structure this, since this is going to be a multi-meeting, and I'm asking really fellow commissioners this question, and staff, if you have input on this, please chime in. But we've got like the overall concept, and then we've got the changes that are proposed citywide to the existing ordinance, and then we've got this pilot program that's specific. Just, do we want to have a broad discussion? Do we want to try and tackle, each item individually, talk about the broader concept first? I mean, does anybody have thoughts on that? I think we need to be efficient in the way we go through this over the next couple of meetings, and if we jump around too much, we might lose track, but I don't necessarily know the best way to go through that. Steve, you have a thought about that?
Yes, I would think the best way is how we've done these large projects in the past, and that's go to the matrix.
Okay.
And go through the matrix one by one and to see if we have comments or any changes or any deletions that we would like to make. Otherwise, I think we would just be jumping around, lose track of certain items, and it would be very confusing for the commission to keep context together.
Yeah, that's my concern. Does the matrix? My only concern with that is that does the matrix really cover everything? Since it's not so much a matrix of the changes, but a matrix of the comments from the focus groups, right?
Right.
So my only concern with that approach would be that that also misses something if it's not. I don't know. Does anybody else? That may be the route we go, but let's talk about it.
I think what I'd like to address first, is from my own understanding, is the process, because staff is asking us to give them direction on drafting a proposal ordinance, which we haven't seen yet. So, right now we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of feedback. What is going to be the process in getting a draft ordinance back to us to review?
That's a fair starting question.
Well, we want to take all of the input that you give us tonight and in an additional meeting if necessary. Take that away, use that in conjunction with all of the information that we've received from the public, from the focus group, from the technical group, and then begin crafting an ordinance that we would bring back to you. So it would be helpful for us to know, sort of where the group is on some of these proposed changes, and maybe that's the most efficient way to work through it. I don't know, but
You do have a draft kind of the pilot program, but the idea would be that we'd actually see a draft of like the entire
Correct.
ADU code section.
yeah.
And
Yes.
this pilot program would just be like a part of that, basically? It would be like a subsection within that?
Yes.
Iris? Oh, yeah, go ahead, sorry, real quick, and
That-
then
That's
Iris.
exactly what, there's some, it's kind of confusing to me. We have a pilot program that's associated with a particular neighborhood, and we have a draft ordinance. I'd like a little more clarity on, what is the draft ordinance going to look like? Is it going to include the pilot program? And then when you guys talk about neighborhood, further neighborhoods looking at, say, detached units, going neighborhood by neighborhood as a legislative process, is there going to be no expectation that we're going to discuss the topic of detached units within other neighborhoods at this time?
No, this is a staff proposal. The commission can develop whatever recommendations you think are appropriate.
Okay, thanks.
Where does feedback from MNAC come back? You take their meeting, their feedback, does it come back to this body?
Yes, that's
It
our
didn't-
intent, is to meet
it's
with
a little
MNAC. Once we
confusing.
have a more concrete proposal, we would meet with MNAC and preview it with them and provide you with their comments as well.
So, Iris, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I think it would be useful to go through the proposed changes on page 3 one by one and talk through those.
Yeah.
I also hope in this early stage, especially after garnering so much feedback from the public, both in the comments that we received from 2016 and 15, as well as what we received for this meeting, that I would hope in this early stage that we can take some time to have some creative brainstorming before we get to a proposed ordinance where we're trying to, like one of those games where you fit a square peg into a circle, and where we can take some time to have some more creative brainstorming time. But I also, based on the feedback from the public and the information provided, feel pretty comfortable outlining outlining my thoughts on each of those proposed changes. So.
Do you think that's kind of that broader discussion I was talking about, that creative thinking you're talking about? Is it appropriate to do that right out the gates, or talk through these things?
It'd be nice to talk through these things and then have an opportunity to think of some outside the box,
Circle back.
circle back to some.
I guess
some further
I like that,
conversation.
and Steve, that strikes at what you're talking about, is having some structure so we don't get lost. But I agree that maybe those 3 pages might be a better guide for that, since they're the specific proposed changes, and then that might drive into some more dynamic discussion, Iris. So I like that idea. Is that okay? Yeah, Mike?
One of the who was on the ADU subcommittee? There was three of us, right? I wasn't on it. But did they have sort of any forward-looking report or summary of what activity they did recently, or is that kind of summarized in the memo here from August 29th? Okay.
Yeah.
Does that cover? I'm just wondering if there was any other thoughts coming out of the people that have been working on this in the subcommittee up till now.
I think most of the work that was done on the subcommittee is pretty well summarized in the staff report here.
Okay.
Just for the benefit of the public, that included Commissioner O'Brien, Iris, you weren't present, and then who else was on that subcommittee?
Phyllis?
Phyllis.
Phyllis.
So the 3 of us were supposed to have been going to those meetings together?
This is going way back to 2015.
This is like,
that's
yeah,
why it's
Mike, that's
hard
the other
to-
thing. This
well,
is
this
like
was
so far ago, and it
tabled for a while.
kind
Okay,
of
so we're
tabled
kind of-
out. So we're almost like starting, kind of like I said, we're almost like starting from fresh here, because there's new members, new ideas. I think
Right.
at least 3 new members since that time, so.
We're starting fresh with a lot of background.
Yeah, some background. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to all that, everybody. So I think your approach is best. Let's start by going through these specific items, and that might lead to more dynamic discussion. And like I said, we'll get into public comment as well. So
Ollie, I just have one question of staff. Is there anything that you see that we're overlooking? If we take this as kind of the outside limits of what we're going to be discussing, are we overlooking something that has come to your attention?
I don't know, let us think about that a little bit.
Yeah, good, thank you.
okay, well, why don't we just start and work through these items with staff? And I think the thing to do is we'll just open up each individual item to the commission if they have a comment on it. And some of these maybe nobody has any comments on, and some of them generate a lot of discussion. And the first one's kind of easy, which is consolidating our standards. So Chris, you spoke to this a little bit, but the idea is just to put everything in one place because it's scattered around right now.
Correct.
Yeah. Does anybody have any comment on that? I mean, seems like a reasonable proposal, and it's
Makes
in line
sense.
with what you guys have been doing with all of our code sections, which is trying to create consistency in the presentation. So if anybody has any comments, we can kind of move right beyond that. And there's this discussion about minor modifications, and I don't know if everybody understood what Chris was talking about, but if there's questions for staff, this might be a good one to ask for clarification on. Does anybody have any questions on the concept of allowing minor modifications through administrative review? No. This is consistent, just so I can understand. You already have that kind of language in like the infill toolkit.
Correct.
So if you're doing a detached ADU in a multifamily zone, this is just kind of mimicking that same language.
Correct.
But it
Yes.
would apply. It would apply then citywide to attached as well.
Yes.
Okay, so that would all become kind of standardized and consolidated as we put these two sections together.
Right, and with that, you know, the second proposal under that one is to add some language to allow some additional flexibility, because the conditions are pretty strict right now. It doesn't really take into account existing buildings on a site. That could complicate how you locate a ADU on a property. And so we'd be looking to add some additional flexibility to make it more useful.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, Lisa had a comment. Right, and then go ahead.
As far as the minor modifications, we more recently approved and where the planning director would be able to have some leeway so that things wouldn't have to necessarily come back, but those minor modifications were somewhat identified, so when this is brought forward, it'd be really useful for those types of minor modifications to be able to be identified so that the public knows whether or not the planning director is following the intent. But it might be also useful for individuals who might want to make public comment, because when you hear that someone has liberty to make modifications after something's been approved, it might be useful for them to know what type, an example of minor modifications, so that we're not getting comments about concerns because they think there might be some overstepping and not understanding what it is.
Okay, thanks.
Garrett? Thanks, Lisa.
Before we get into this too deeply, I was just hoping I could make a comment just on context to where we're at, because a lot of people showed up here tonight to attend this meeting, and we started this process back in 2015. Some of the members of the Planning Commission are no longer here. There's been quite a lot of turnover, and I'm sure there's a lot of frustration from people who are saying, you know, this has been 2 years, what's going on? I don't know that everybody came here tonight to listen to us go through these proposed changes. It doesn't sound like there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of comment. There will be comment. We started this process in 2015. We've received a ton of written comment and written and spoken comment, testimony, and it is being considered, and we are kind of starting over, but we want people to stay engaged. There will be opportunities to speak on this, and we really want to try to draft a good ordinance. There's a lot of pressures right now on housing. There's a lot of pressure on costs. There's a lot of infill that's happening in our neighborhoods, and a lot of people want answers. We want to work on something good, so we would like to stay engaged and be patient through this process. So.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. And that's kind of what I was trying to speak to at the beginning of the meeting, and just so the intent is clear, and, you know, we're tasked with assisting the staff with the development of these ordinances, not just for ADUs, and also making a recommendation to council, as Greg noted. And so a part of that is conducting these work sessions where it's really focused on our discussion. So you're right, it may seem boring or wonky at times, but there's a component, that the public hearing component, which is the flip side of that, which is the focus on that public commentary. We still take comment, like I talked about at the beginning, but thank you for clarifying that. I don't want anyone to have any misconceptions about that intent. And yeah, we do kind of have to put our head down and kind of dig in at times. So thank you. I just wanted to, back to the minor modifications real quick. Chris, I want to speak to the planning commissioners about this because I've dealt with this professionally. There was not, what Chris is talking about is that there was not language. One of the criteria, you see it in the pilot program on page 7, was the site's constrained due to unusual shape or topography, or an easement or something like that, or a sensitive area. And this one comment, existing development on the site, was not previously included. And that's a really big deal because a lot of these sites are sites that are already developed with a home. And so the home might be located on the lot in such a way that it restricts your ability to comply outright with the code. And so maybe that's down in the weeds a bit, but that's a really important inclusion in this because it gives the staff the flexibility to acknowledge like a unique existing condition on the site, which is probably like 90% of these lots are developed already. So Chris, appreciate you commenting on that because I actually think that's really important. It's just one little sentence, but it's going to make it way easier for people to implement this thing, and that's important. So anyway, okay, this is the third one's maybe the biggest, where allowed. So let's talk about that a little bit as a group. Right now, we've got this neighborhood by neighborhood concept, and then a Happy Valley pilot program, and then the maximum number being removed citywide. So commentary on that. Iris, you had your hand up?
Thank you. For the detached ADUs, just for folks who don't have it in front of them, the proposed change would be to allow single-family zoned areas on a per-neighborhood basis by legislative action, such as what's happened in the Happy Valley neighborhood. And I think that's an exciting thing that has happened, and it's not a norm in most communities. Social and political science research shows that a lot of times a community will, and a person will have a value that doesn't necessarily, when it's ephemeral, doesn't necessarily align with when it's put to the test in their own neighborhood or in their own maybe environmental practices. And so while I understand and value the weight of our neighborhood associations, and I think they have a really important place, I don't believe that we should have zoning for detached ADUs be based on a by neighborhood basis. I think it should be every part of the city needs to step up and take responsibility for creating more housing available in Bellingham.
Steve? Thank you, Iris.
I totally agree with you, Iris. I think that's a real good point. And I don't think we should limit these ADUs in any neighborhood. But the thing that bothers me the most is when you look at that super report that came from the Seahome Board and their investigation as to what we have out there right now. The city says there's 2 units out there that have been approved. The Seahome Board comes back with 27 illegals out there. So when you get an application for an ADU, what do you do with it? It's already, there could be this diversion of units that are really impacting improperly a house. So I've always kind of leaned towards the conditional use permit. Hopefully that would involve the neighbors that an ADU is going to be built or put in there. And this will bring in neighbors. You could have 3 of them within the same block that are illegal. First of all, nowhere in this entire booklet do I see anything about enforcement. There's nothing written other than the fact that the rental registration program will magically take care of this. Now, I've got a question for staff on the rental registration. How many illegal ADUs have been discovered since the program has been implemented?
My understanding, rental registration is not identifying illegal units.
Well, it says that in here.
Rental registration is looking at life and safety issues. Kurt may want to speak to this more.
It says that it says right in this packet in the matrix that the rental registration program will identify the illegal ADUs. Okay, that aside, there's no enforcement program here. What are we going to do with all? We don't even know how many illegals are out there. We don't know how to discover them. But when I see a matrix like this presented by the Seahome Board, that they found 27 of them just walking up and down the street, I'm very concerned about that. And here we're putting another program on top of a program that's basically failed. So where do we go?
Good evening, Kurt Nabafeld, Planning and Community Development Department. To respond to that, with the rental registration program and safety inspection, Greg is correct. We're not allowed to use that specific inspection process or rental process to identify different zoning code violations or other types of code violations. However, what we are able to do is use the data that we're given to compare that with other data that we have from an enforcement perspective. And so we have in doing that, we do have a list of potential illegal units that we are working towards. We've hired an enforcement planner as part of that program to assist with the illegal unit dwelling enforcement. So it's incorporated into that program. Keep in mind that program is still relatively new. We've only gotten through 1 year of inspections, so we're consistently modifying that program. We're trying to see what works and what doesn't work. So there is a component of that, that the data that's collected, we will be able to utilize that. In response to the Samish neighborhood, I think one of the things that we look at right now from an enforcement perspective is that when we get complaints, when people actually file complaints, we have a very high compliance rate with that. So if people file complaints regarding illegal dwelling units, again, very high percentage of compliance. We work with property owners to either remove the illegal dwelling units or other zoning code violations, or find ways to allow them to become compliant with our system. With regards to the list of the Seahome neighborhood, we haven't received, at least not to my knowledge, any official complaint of those. We've received a list, and we have said from day one, we've talked about illegal dwelling units, that if people submit complaints, we will look into those and enforce on those.
Thank you.
Iris and Lisa?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to, it often seems like this commission goes right to talking about how will we enforce the folks who are outside of whatever regulation is set up. And I think it seems befuddling to me particularly to look at this map and see that all of these white areas are areas where a detached ADU is currently illegal. Of course there's going to be a lot of illegal ADUs. That's like most of Bellingham, and it seems like if we focus so much on enforcement versus how do we incentivize a program that is healthy, where it's easy to build, where you're doing something you're building in a way that matches the community needs, and where the instructions are clear and equitable across the board versus, for folks who live in every neighborhood, then that we don't have to have as much enforcement, and it doesn't seem like a good place to start the conversation.
Thank you. And Lisa, I want to get to your comment, but I agree to a certain degree that to me, enforcement is a citywide issue across many, many ordinances, and it's not relevant directly to the topic at hand. That's just my opinion. Whether or not an ADU should be 800 square feet or 25 or 20 feet in height has nothing to do with whether or not we administer a good enforcement program. It's more of this discussion about, do they fit into the character? Should we allow them? And I think we can get derailed from the important things related to this if we focus on that. And so I'd like to kind of have that discussion now quickly amongst the commission to see if that's the direction we want to go. Do we want to direct staff to stop all this discussion until we get enforcement figured out, until we figure out everything that's going on in the citywide? Because if that's the direction, then we're going to waste a bunch of time talking about this ordinance, because that's not going to happen in any reasonable period of time. If we want to acknowledge that enforcement is an issue in our community of illegal activities relative to the building code, well beyond ADUs, and support the city's efforts to resolve that, but acknowledge that that's an outside issue, then I think we should do that, and then we can collectively move on. If the group doesn't agree with that, then maybe we stop the discussion, because it could derail the whole thing. I think that's an insightful comment. Lisa?
I do think enforcement is really important because we are potentially expanding what type of dwelling units will be in a neighborhood. And we don't want, we're trying to avoid a situation where everybody has to file a special permit because that's time consuming, it's expensive. So we want to try to come up with an ordinance that can be complied with. And there's a long history of, I know complaints get filed and there's no follow-up on it. I've personally experienced that. And I think people get jaded to a certain point because they do have issues. And so I think I've talked to a ton of people, I know my personal opinion. I'm not totally against detached ADUs if they're owner occupied, if there's the right amount of space. And we can legislate or we can, work out the details about height and parking and all those kind of things. But if we can't currently file a complaint that there is an unpermitted ADU and have follow-up and have it dealt with, how are we going to expect as neighborhoods that if we go ahead, because a lot of people who say that they support expansion, but it's really important to have owner occupancy so that there's some level of monitoring of behavior. But if we can't enforce what we have currently, how are we going to tell the public we're going to expand this and give people an opportunity to continue to fly in the face the occupied by an owner? Because we have a lot of that. And, we'll be dealing with other issues coming up with short-term rental, which is the same situation, So it's hard to go forward and say, these are great ideas. We're going to put our faith in the city because they're going to be able to enforce a really critical element to be able to do this expansion in neighborhoods when it's failed miserably in the past. So I don't personally have the trust until I know what the enforcement is and that it's going to be able to be backed up if we decide to expand it and it's going to be hinged on owner occupancy. Because I can't imagine a detached ADU being built in a single-family home where someone has spent $50,000 or $60,000 to do it, and now they're not occupying it. Is the city going to go in there and bulldoze down that small house structure because the owner lives in California or they live in Edgemore? I mean, I see that highly doubtful that that's going to happen, and so I think we're going to have more issues of that. And given the past history of not enforcing so many things, like how many people can live in a house that are, whether it's right or wrong, it's on the books. And people expect things to be enforced that are on the books. And when they're not, it's really hard to go forward expanding something when you don't have trust it's going to be enforced. So I do think it is part of the conversation. I do think it matters.
It does matter.
It's hard to go forward and say, these are all great ideas. I support this because if this part is not done, it's impossible to say this stuff is going to be beneficial for the community. It will be for some, but it's also detrimental for others.
How do we have a discussion? How do we get someone who's skeptical like yourself to a point where you can say, let's engage in a discussion about this topic? Do we have to there's people in the audience tonight who've talked to us before, so we have to know every single thing before we can do anything. And that's not a realistic approach to legislation. So I ask you, if there's going to be people who say we have to get this whole enforcement thing figured out down pat before we even start a legitimate discussion, you have to fall down with, like, how are we going to do that? What point are we going to get to where we can talk about it?
And we do need to, I do want to go forward. I think it's important. It's like some of the other issues. If we don't deal with it, it stays in the shadows and it continues to be a problem. But we just, we can't just say enforcement doesn't matter. It's not part of the puzzle. It's
and that's not
it's
the
an
suggestion
important
I
part
have.
of the puzzle.
Of course
So
it's
it needs
important.
to be part of the discussion. And we need to have assurances from the city that this is going to be their plan. So if we do go forward with some of these things, I want to hear in that plan what that enforcement's going to be, that the city is committing the resources to pursue those enforcements, and that they're willing to back it up, because there are some situations that we avoid going into court with landlords because we don't want to go down that alley, but I want to hear that the city is ready to step up and do it. because then I'm not necessarily skeptical, I'm a little bit jaded because of personal experience. And I'm hopeful too, because this is something we need. I think it's a great opportunity. I think there's a lot of things that we can better our neighborhoods with. And again, I hear a lot of people saying, I'm not against ADUs, I'm concerned about this. And if we don't mitigate that, we're going to have rooms full of people, and there's going to be people divided. And it should be an opportunity we bring people together, and they're excited about this. But if we don't get it right when it comes to enforcement on the elements that we say is, if you could have this, then this is part of the criteria, and if not, this is how we're going to deal with it. If we don't get it together and follow through on it, I mean, it's just going to be harder as we continue the next 20 years to try to deal with our expansion.
I think those are all good comments. We're, Ali asked the question, are we going to just stop and not move forward until we figure out enforcement or our existing inventory illegal? And I think clearly we're well past that. We want to move forward, we want to draft something, but we want to consider what likely enforcement options would be as a part of one of the many things that we talk about. Our job is to help direct staff and come up with some creative ideas. We talk about permitting fees. There's been a lot of discussion about sliding scale of permit fees for ADUs. Maybe there should be a percentage of the fees that should go towards enforcement action, as opposed to a $4,000 park impact fee for a 500-foot ADU. So there are options that we can come up with as we continue the discussion, but it is good to hear this and have it be part of it. I think, and Iris makes a good point about if this is clear and is something that can work across the city, because I agree, it shouldn't be neighborhood by neighborhood. That's the easy way out, and that's just pushing it down to nowhere. If we're going to do it, we need to work at it and do it. So,
Mike, Steve, and then Phyllis.
In a lot of the comments on this, you hear talk of the illegal ADUs. It's odd to me to hear the term illegal applied to something that someone's living in. This isn't some conflict in the Middle East. We're not going to bulldoze homes. We have a housing crisis. We're not removing supply. That's insane. There might be a way to do, I was hoping the rental registration portion could, if a non-owner, if a ADU pair is owned by an investor or business and that's out of compliance, maybe temporarily they're not allowed to rent that until, you get back to the place where it was intended to be, if that's what the rules are. For me, there's the ability to have a firewall here of talking about the ADUs that have been permitted and built since '94. From what staff was saying, it sounds like there have not been a lot of enforcement needs or problematic behavior from the permitted official ADUs. There's a lot of outbuildings that exist prior to '94, and for a long time, they weren't illegal. And so to call something that existed from before 1994 that was totally legitimate at the time and the proper use, that is suddenly now illegal is a little bit odd. And I'm wondering if staff has any numbers, either now or at a later date, on in the compliance issues you have been notified about or addressed, were any of those built since '94, or were they pre-existing? And that might be hard to tell. And have there been issues with new construction, modern construction since the mid-'90s that are not being permitted?
I think what I can do is maybe to help you understand the enforcement process with illegal dwelling units, maybe explain how things happen. So when when a complaint is filed with the city, we look into those complaints. And the way that we do that is we send a property owner a letter asking them, essentially informing them that we've received a complaint and that they may or may not be aware that they may be violating codes and to contact us. So we're trying to, again, that voluntary compliance is the key. What we do specifically with illegal units is that they essentially have two different options or two different paths. One option would be to show that the potential illegal unit was legally created in past under past rules and regulations. That's what's called the non-conforming use certificate. So it may not be allowed today, but it may have been allowed 50 years ago. Many of our neighborhoods, our single-family neighborhoods, used to allow duplexes through a planning commission approval, or apartment buildings through planning commission approval. So there are many units out there that are located in single-family zones that may have 2 detached homes on their property that were legally constructed. So that's our first step, is to try to determine, was it legally constructed? Does it meet this non-conforming use certificate? The second option that property owners have is to determine whether or not they were constructed prior to 1995, and there's allowance in our existing ADU ordinance that says for illegal units constructed prior to 95, whether or not they can meet those today's rules and ADU ordinances. And the key with that one is always owner occupancy. So what we find is that when people buy these houses, which we find a lot, they don't know that they're illegal, that there are illegal units on it. They bought a house and they are living in it, they've been renting out, and they don't understand that it's illegal. So what we'll do is we'll give them the option. One, go this non-conforming use certificate route, which means you have to prove that that unit was legally established under some other zoning code or prior to the adoption of the zoning code. Or 2, follow the rules and regulations for ADUs now. That means, do you have enough parking? Can you meet the size limitations? Are you living on site? Is the property owner living on site? And if they can do that, then they go through that standard ADU process and become compliant ADUs. So I know one in the Columbia neighborhood, for example, that they are a detached accessory dwelling unit. They went through the ADU process because they had been established during that time that we adopted the first one, and they are a legal detached accessory dwelling unit in a single-family neighborhood. So just because a unit is out there doesn't mean that it can't come into compliance through one of these different mechanisms. And that's really what we try to do and offer that up. So I don't have specific numbers on that. What we can do is we can provide, definitely we can provide numbers on enforcement. How many complaints do we get regarding illegal dwelling units? What's our success rate? Where are we at? We can provide those types of numbers. You know, maybe coming back and having a better discussion about enforcement. I think that's something that staff we can put together something on that. Enforcement is not just one thing that we've talked about with ADUs and during this group. Enforcement, like the other commissioners have mentioned, is a citywide issue and concern. We have programs called the Town Gown program, where the city is working with Western Washington and other neighborhoods to try to work at the impacts associated with student housing, rental housing, illegal units. We've got that component that's working. So you've got the Town Gown component. We've got the rental registration safety inspection program that's out there. As I mentioned, we hired a new planner recently that's, they're geared towards enforcement. So we are doing things and responding to the concerns about enforcement.
So is it accurate to say that the non-conforming use certificates aren't included when we talk about the 107 ADUs on the map?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So those ones that have been officially grandfathered in are part of that report, are not part of that report?
Not if they were grandfathered in under a non-conforming use certificate, but if they were grandfathered in under a ADU process, then they are included in that total number.
Yeah. So I mean, I see room for us to move forward on what we want to see for good actors who are doing ADUs and permitting them, and what we want that to look like. And I think there is a conversation to be had about enforcement, and those perhaps can happen in parallel, just like we're talking about short-term rentals in parallel. But it shouldn't be a block. If everything blocks each other, we're never going to accomplish any policy.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Steve?
Yeah, I agree with that. I believe there's a need for legal ADUs. I think there's an excellent need. In my own family, we had a situation we wanted to keep in place, and it wasn't possible. So my main concern right now is let's get something in this, a component for enforcement. There is none now. I think it should be looked at, talked about, and move forward with that element. Now, the second thing is, there's some conflicting stuff in here. Just a quick question for you. And if you had, for instance, one street and you had 2 illegal ADUs on there, and you had one homeowner right down the street that has been waiting patiently to put in a permit, the new system in place, to get a legal ADU. What happens if those illegals say, oh, I'm gonna go ahead and make mine legal? Who has priority in this request? Do the illegals tell the guy that's been sitting out there waiting patiently that, no, you're sorry, we've got these illegals that are ahead of you? So I think this is a question that should really be looked at and considered as to priorities in issuing permits for a detached ADU.
Phyllis? Thanks, Steve.
Well, I'm just sitting here listening to all this going on, and it seems to me like we need to come up with a model for, we're separating it from the compliance and enforcement simply because that's very difficult to weave into the model. And we're assuming that that will eventually take place. And then we can be working on enforcement. But Greg or somebody, who ultimately comes up with the enforcement process? I mean, is that something that we're going to be asked to address anyway?
No, there wouldn't be any enforcement provisions in this specific code section.
So, I mean, are we at some other point, though, going to be asked to address enforcement? Would that likely come back to us, or are we just worried about that when we wouldn't even be creating enforcement procedures?
I think Kurt can correct me if I'm wrong, but our enforcement procedures are done administratively. They're not.
Okay.
I mean, those standards are set in the code, but the methods that we use and the process that we use for enforcement is administrative. So no, you wouldn't get involved in the details of that.
Got it.
You would help set the standards.
Well, then I think we need to come back and look at a desirable model for the accessory dwelling units and focus on that. And somebody else is going to be making those other decisions.
Lisa, you had a comment?
Tailing in on that, amnesty. So for the people who have unpermitted ADUs currently, would the city be considering an amnesty program where they would allow a certain period of time for the people to be able to register those and go that route? And would that be something we would be looking at?
We aren't looking to change the existing amnesty provision. Right now, that amnesty provision states that illegal units that were in place prior to adoption of the original ordinance in 1995, those can come forward. Any illegal units that have been created since 1995, they don't have the ability to come forward. The only way that they can come forward is if they meet the standards in place at that time, if they allow them. So if a detached accessory dwelling unit was created in a single-family zone in 2003, after adoption of the initial program, there's no way that they could make that legal because currently detached units are not allowed in most single-family zones. So they missed that window, or basically it was created post.
Point of clarification then. So if it went forward, I'm not saying it will, but if it did go forward and it went to the city that detached was allowed in all single-family neighborhoods, would the city then be considering an amnesty program? And would that come forward to us as far as part of the criteria?
It doesn't really become an amnesty program. It becomes a tool for enforcement that we can use to steer an illegal situation towards legality. So if they have something that's illegal, they've done it illegally, but there is a mechanism to do it legally, then we can steer them towards that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then one of the things that was mentioned earlier was incentivizing. So would we be at all working on incentivizing within this ordinance as far as someone maybe lowering the fees if they put their ADU up into like Opportunity Council for Low-Income Housing, or that they agree for a period of time that they would take people with housing vouchers in exchange for a reduction in that fee? I know that there are some things on the book for developers who develop a certain percentage of their housing to be dedicated to low income. They got a tax incentive from the city. So would we have the ability to put something in this plan that would maybe go in exchange that we can increase access for people of low incomes? Because I know housing vouchers it's been hard for people to get housing. So personally, if there is a way to put something in, I would really encourage that reduction of fees based on a period of time taking people who are on housing vouchers in exchange. If there's a way that we can address that in here, that would be great.
There aren't any incentives built into the staff proposal. We could consider that. Just for your information, the city attorney's office is, in conjunction with the council, is working on an ordinance, an anti-discrimination ordinance that would make it illegal for landlords to discriminate against renters based on where their rent money is coming from. So it would address that Section 8 issue. So that's being worked on right now.
Lisa, that's a good discussion topic. I think we might need to have like a whole little discussion on its own about incentives. Garrett's idea is also, in a sense, an incentive. I had some thoughts about the impact fee structure that we've got right now and how that might be able to incentivize some of these. So I think that's a really good topic that maybe we roll into a little bit further down. I mean, I appreciate every single commissioner commenting on this enforcement issue, and I want to clarify, I really actually kind of align with what you're thinking. When I spoke about separating the two, I don't mean that that component's not important. I just didn't want it to preclude the greater discussion. I think we can talk about how things like putting money toward it or other things, maybe we can't control that, like Phyllis said, maybe we don't get to implement that, but we can certainly make recommendations to council. And if we find that, you know, there's some ideas that we have about how to help the enforcement model, you know, and we can roll that in, and that's definitely a part of the discussion. I just didn't want this to preclude us talking about whether or not the legal ones are appropriate. You know, if we're having problems with illegals. So if we set up a good structure for legals, then that's a separate issue in a sense. I would like to say something on what started this, and I want to say I completely agree with you, Iris. We can't let the city turn into Roman city-states and say, yeah, this neighborhood gets it and this neighborhood doesn't. And this neighborhood gets to decide their own fate and this neighborhood doesn't. I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. I think the tone of this is wrong, of that element. I think we should be saying Happy Valley has stepped up and is willing to sacrifice themselves, in a sense, to see if this is a good idea. And if it works, then we should talk about the whole city. We shouldn't pick off neighborhoods one at a time. If it doesn't work, then maybe it doesn't work citywide. But I see Happy Valley as a test case for a discussion about the whole city. So I totally agree. I'm really opposed to the idea of us coming back 26 times to ask each neighborhood if they think it's okay. I don't think that's the right solution long term. But that's not what we're talking about today. Everyone be aware, you know, we're not talking about implementing this citywide or picking off individual neighborhoods today. We're talking about just Happy Valley and then these general changes. And so I think it's more of like a messaging thing, maybe, the way you guys are presenting this. It really makes it sound like we get to go through the Happy Valley process 26 times. And I think it should be messaged as Happy Valley as a test case so we can talk about the whole city. That's just my opinion.
This is of staff again.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just to be clear, in this process, if it was the direction of the commission to recommend staff to incorporate a citywide implementation of this policy, we can.
We could, yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, just to clarify, this wasn't the part, this is in the modification, so I thought that I was saying that we should allow the single-family zoned areas and then scratch the on a per neighborhood basis line. I am suggesting that we implement detached ADUs
Citywide at
Yeah,
this
that
time.
was
Okay.
Exact, sorry.
I
should be more
misunderstood
clear.
that, yeah.
No, that's
And
100%
you're
what
right,
I was
Garrett. We
trying
can
to
have
say.
that discussion, and if the body made that recommendation, then that would be a recommendation that would go forward.
Well, I think that's just a big part of this, you know? We have this open, look, we're 2 years working on this, and we have nothing. So, I mean, we have something, but it's not much, and that's 2 years. So we're gonna do a pilot program. I mean, everything's out here right now. We have comment. I think we should work towards coming up with an ordinance that's gonna last for 10, 15, 20 years until it needs to be modified again, and not just push it out.
Okay, well, that's a different discussion than,
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't more clear. That
yeah, no, that's okay. I appreciate that.
by point and saying what we agreed with and what we didn't, and that's
No,
what I was
yeah, I
saying is
misunderstood
that-
what you were
yeah,
saying.
okay.
So, Phyllis?
Well, so, Greg, are there applications going on right now? I mean, what are we doing with people who come forward and want to put in an ADU?
Detached, Phyllis, or attached?
Either one. I mean, in other words, we're looking at coming up with modifications to the plan, but something must be going on at this time. So what's happening now while we're doing this?
Yeah, no, we are still taking applications at this time. It's only the South Hill neighborhood that has reached its capacity of 20 approvals. And so we are not accepting any new applications for accessory dwelling units for South Hill. The rest of the city, we are, whether it's single-family zones for attached ADUs or multifamily zones for detached ADUs.
And you're not taking into consideration any of the illegal ADUs during those, when you're processing those applications, is that correct? When you're not saying, oh, there's all this illegal stuff going on, therefore we need to react to you this way. You're not,
No, those are separate cases.
Got
We
it.
have active applications for legal activity. We have separate activities for enforcement of illegal activities. Those are both going forward, but the illegal activities, you know, they come in on a case-by-case basis.
but the person making the application is not having to be concerned about these
No.
illegal activities?
No.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Can I ask you guys, the two of you, a question then? Is the suggestion that you'd like to have that kind of discussion right now? I mean, because yeah, I guess,
I would like to be clear about the process too right now, because Steve brought up the conditional use permit. Right now, to currently permit an ADU, it's a conditional use, is that correct?
No,
no.
it's a type 2 process.
So what we're talking about doing is codifying it across, see, I don't know why we wouldn't be talking about a citywide ordinance. We're 2 years on the making on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe staff could speak to that. I mean, citywide versus a pilot program, what kind of drove that decision-making process?
Well, I think it was a result of all the discussions that we've had and wanting to enter into this in a measured way and recognizing that we do have an issue with illegal units. And so we've got areas now where, you know, pretty much anywhere attached ADUs are allowed. Certain zone detached ADUs are allowed. We've got a neighborhood that wants to try detached ADUs in a single-family zone. Let's start with that. If the commission feels strongly about something different, you are free to recommend that, and we'll support it in front of the council. So, yes, we want you to have a discussion about the scope of this thing. It's not just what staff has proposed. It's what you think the right thing to do for the community is. And if that's a broader scope change, then let's talk about it. This is the time to do that.
Well, you know, my thoughts on it is we're looking at 22 years where this has been a permitted use. There's been about 5 per year that have been built. There's probably been 10 times that amount of infill development within our neighborhoods. People are seeing change in their neighborhoods and want to have a voice in it. You don't have a voice if there's a single-family zone lot, somebody wants to build a 3-story house. You don't get a say in that. That's property rights. That's probably why there's so much interest here, is because we do have a voice in this and we want to hear about it. But a lot of people are concerned why houses are $450,000 for a house. We haven't extended services to the UGAs in years. So we're feeling the pressure in our city. Is this going to solve all the infill problems? Absolutely not. Is it going to make affordability on affordability go away? No. But I think our job is to make action about planning for our future and not one neighborhood at a time as a city. And we have public involvement, we have written comment, testimony, we're here. I would like to do it. I think it's in the best interest of the community to have a well-written ordinance that's citywide.
Mike?
In our packet is a report from the Sightline Institute ranking cities in the region that have done ADUs and how they're handling them. There's about 50 in the list. If you go through the column of where they allow detached ADUs, you'll be hard pressed to find ones that do not allow them in single-family zones. There's only about 5. It's very uncommon to not allow detached ADUs in single-family zones. For me, the multifamily. If you look at the map of the yellow map of where we don't allow detached ADUs in single-family zones and the map of where they've been built, most of the ones that have been built will appear to be in single-family zones. A multifamily zone, you can do a higher, more dense use. I lived in the lower Sunnyland area and in multifamily, and I owned a house there, and I didn't see any infill happening in the 9 years I was there. Our multifamily areas deserve better density than an ADU. We should be seeing duplexes and townhomes go in multifamily. That provides the opportunity for ownership. Those units can be sold separately at significantly lower cost. The one criticism I have of ADUs that I take some weight in is, that's going to be a more expensive parcel with a building in the back, and that's going to be a little bit less affordable. It's going to help with rental prices because it'll be rentable, but it's not independently sellable, and so that'll be more expensive. I'd rather see in multifamily those small scale, missing middle, duplex, whatever, stuff like that can be sold independently. Where you see value in infill is doing it in small scales in single family zones.
Thanks, Mike. I can say from some experience working with the infill toolkit over the past 3 or 4 years, it's become more popular. I mean, it was implemented a while ago and kind of in the recession, so nobody used it for a while. But yeah, it's only allowed in the residential multi-zones, for example. Nobody is taking infill toolkit projects and just slapping a carriage house or a detached ADU behind a single-family home. They're looking for more dense opportunities in the multifamily zones. They're looking to build townhouses or, attached garden court type developments. I'm sure staff would support that conclusion. So I agree. It's almost like underutilizing a multifamily property, and broadly,
both from the individual's value, like you can make more money doing that, but also from the community's value.
Yeah,
achieving density.
If everybody's going to absorb a little bit of the pressure, then the only way for single family neighbors to do that is to explore accessory options like this, and to segregate it to a multifamily zone. I completely agree. Is kind of a weird approach that we've taken, and nobody's taking advantage of that. They're doing the other things you talked about. So it's almost like, it's kind of pointless the way it's set up. Garrett's suggesting that we talk about this citywide. I mean, is there? I think that would change the dynamic of our conversation a bit. I mean, we still have to talk about all of these proposed changes, and I want to make sure that there's appetite for that discussion. It's not for me to say. We're a body of equals. Lisa?
I know I'm probably already outnumbered, but that's okay, because I can be a scrapper too. But I don't necessarily agree, but I am somebody who believes in trying to find middle ground. I'm not opposed to detached ADUs. I had the same concern you did, Mike, that I think it's going to price people out of being able to buy a house in our neighborhoods, because the people who have money and they can afford to build that detached ADU, they're going to raise that $350,000 house, which is really outpricing a lot of people as it is now. And that's going to raise it up to $500,000 or more to be able to sell it. So we're really going to take, if we're striving to try to create affordability, I don't see a lot of evidence that says that a detached ADU is going to be any less than market rate. And so whether you're in an apartment, a condo, you might actually pay more because you are in a neighborhood. So I haven't seen the evidence that it's making it greatly affordable. it might help a little bit because of size, but if we increase from, a smaller percentage to a larger percentage where you might have more bedrooms, then the price would go with that. So there is concern about creating a market that is going to be impenetrable for, a lower middle income family to be able to buy a house in the downtown area. So that's a concern. But if we are going to be looking at something like that, again, the quality of living in a neighborhood, because a lot of, people talk about my right about my one piece of property, but I maintain my property because I think of the aesthetics and the rights of everybody else to not have noise and debris and something that's unsightful because somebody next to me has made an investment too. People are in those neighborhoods for a reason because the density, a lot of our closer to downtown is really dense. And yes, we do have to take our share, but dispersion, like how many there's going to be, for me is just a deal breaker, because if we just open the floodgates and we have a detached behind every single house, especially if we drop it from 10,000 to 5,000, I mean, you basically are creating duplex situations, multifamily living in some of the densest neighborhoods of Bellingham. There are other areas, because they have covenants, they're not going to have to experience that. But a lot of our centralized neighborhoods will be, and I'm concerned about not only the parking, but the pressure on our tiny pocket parks. I think of Harriet Spinell Park. If we increased by a third the housing in that 4-block area with no additional parks, because unless the city's going to buy some of these houses and develop an additional park, we have to think about making sure that things are leveled out, that it's still more of a livable situation. So dispersion will be very important. Concerned about the pricing.
Iris, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just had really appreciated this afternoon doing some research on the Municipal Research and Services Center website in 2 areas in which ADUs, particularly detached ADUs that can serve a community like Bellingham, where we have a population of 54% of our houses occupied by renters and have such a high amount of people who, for some, may be choosing to rent, is that it increases the stock overall, which, even if market values continue, is going to make more accessible housing. And also an ADU, while it may be more expensive than an apartment, creates more space for those apartments to be rented towards that lower income bracket that right now isn't finding a place to live at all. And those lower income bracket, or the middle income bracket that's competing for those apartments, can find ADUs, can find duplexes. And so it creates a middle part of the pipeline that right now is, I think, really missing in our community.
I wonder if you build an ADU and you go to get financing, if you can roll that income, like to buy a home with an ADU, if you can roll that income into the, I don't know, I'm asking this question, I guess, into that like financing model, so that the bank, so yeah, maybe it's not 350, it's 500, but it really hasn't made that much of a difference on the buyer, because they can say, well, I'm generating income from this, and the bank respects that income. Then I don't know if that's how they work, but if that's how they work, then that issue of the overall price going up is kind of mitigated to a certain degree, because you can still have a lower qualified buyer get in.
One thing I've heard is a bank is hesitant to include income from the ADU rental in qualifying for the mortgage, because if you have an owner occupancy requirement and the bank forecloses, the bank can't rent out the ADU.
Gotcha. So that could generate.
The owner occupancy is kind of self-defeating on that financing.
I think that it's important too, and I think staff commented on this in the staff report, but the primary, I think, goal that staff is suggesting ADUs will provide is not affordability necessarily. It's housing choice. It's providing opportunity for different housing forms and for old people to live, or move into it and to hold their home when they don't need a 2,000 square foot home anymore, or a 2-story home, or to rent to a kid. I mean, there are horror stories, obviously, about people taking advantage of every situation that exists out there, but I don't think we can characterize the situation like every single ADU that got built is going to be that horror story. There's also lots of value to those. And so I think if we focus too much on affordability, there's lots of things that impact affordability in our community, but it's not necessarily about that. It's about housing choice, providing a variety of opportunities for people. The things you're talking about, you know, the family that's in an apartment now because that's all they have option-wise, and maybe that intermediate step is an ADU, and then that frees up the apartment for somebody else. You know, it's about choice. And I would just say that one of the key opportunities that Chris went through was better utilization of our existing infrastructure. When you talk about parks, I mean, I go to that park all the time with my kid, and there's nobody there. And when it is packed, it's not that packed. And when you go to a big city and go to a park, it is slammed with people. And that's what parks are for. An urban park is not supposed to provide you with the ability to take up a ton of space and not see anybody, my opinion. You know, you should go there and see hundreds of people. If every single square inch of that park had a blanket on it with people playing, that's like me looking at it going, man, that's a great use of our park impact fees. That's a great use of our infrastructure. That's just my personal opinion. And I know other people probably would love to see an urban forest in the middle of our town. I don't think that's a good utilization of our space. But I think it's important that we think about, are we utilizing all of our infrastructure well enough? I mean, to me, that was one of the biggest pros was, you know, how do we sustain ourselves long-term? Taxes and not extending services and packing more people into our existing infrastructure is one way to do that. Yeah.
I'd just like to make a final comment, and then I think we should call the question as far as our direction and however we should do that. But I went back, I was reading the comments from 2015, and the comments weren't, I would like to see what a pilot program in Happy Valley looks like and see if it's successful, and in 5 years, revisit this topic. It was, I have a need now. You know, I have an elderly father. I want to build a detached unit over my garage. Can I do that? I went to the city and found out that I can't. I'm frustrated. I don't have options. But it wasn't neighborhood specific. I was reading comments from all over the city. That's what we should be doing here. And I think we should that's a big decision. I think we should decide on that really before we move forward.
Well, if we are to do that and a recommendation goes forward, it would be important that we address, as we do that, we address each of these kind of like standards and criteria in such a way that staff can get value from that. If at the next level up, at the decision-making level, that falls away, for example, you know, and it goes to a pilot program. If that's the direction we move, we need to be cognizant of that, and so I would hope that whatever direction that discussion goes, that everybody participates in that kind of concept of, okay, we still need to get, you know, whether you like it citywide, whether you like it in one neighborhood, whether you don't like it at all, we still need to go through all the details and with commitment so that we can not only make a recommendation on that broader topic, but also these specific questions that staff needs to consider to go to council. Does that make sense? It's important for us to talk about these details too. Iris?
Promise this is the last. I think one of the other benefits of moving forward in a more bold and comprehensive way is that either way, our council has been tasked with moving forward and implementing the infill toolkit citywide. And I think a lot of criticism that the city has gotten is that we've drug our feet with that. And so if we're able to, on this very small piece of the puzzle, take a bold and decisive action that is broad reaching and across the city, I think it'll help encourage the city and council to move forward on the other aspects of the infill toolkit and other pieces of the puzzle, so that it's not just all ADUs and that it's not all different, that it's moved forward more comprehensively.
So I don't think that is that a motion? Can I ask staff for some direction on that? If we wanted to proceed with that discussion more broadly, is that something we can just do, or do you think we would need to make a motion to?
Well, I think what you would be providing is preliminary direction at this point for us to come back with whatever changes to the staff proposal you think are appropriate, if that's one of them. That way, people know that that's part of the proposal now. They'll be able to respond to it. We haven't had a hearing yet, so you're not making any decisions at this point. You're just providing preliminary direction to staff to come back with, in addition to these changes, whatever other changes you think are appropriate. We would come back, talk through those. I don't know if your recommendation is to do detached citywide, how that might change these regulations. I don't know that it would, but it might. So we would need to think about that. So you would provide us with that direction. We would come back to you to talk that through. And so then once we have a more concrete proposal with the staff's recommended changes and whatever else you think is appropriate, then that can be the subject of a public hearing and people have a chance to understand the scope of what's being proposed and comment on it.
Would it make sense for us to discuss, I mean, in a sense, table that question because it's such a major question and discuss all of these things that would apply either way we went, and then circle back after we've gone through these items and kind of address that in a motion format so, prior to a public hearing, but not tonight? I don't know. Lisa?
I don't think we could, because some of the things that we would be agreeing upon, like going from 10,000 feet down to 5,000 feet, is with the understanding that, you know, it's not detached in single family. So if we are going to go forward with that as a recommendation, then that's going to flavor everything else as far as scope, size. And then we may need to add categories that aren't even here because it wasn't part of the consideration. So I think we need to, if that's going to be supported, that's a major change that needs to be reflected on when we consider these other things.
You feel like the proposals that would apply in the Happy Valley pilot program, you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable applying citywide if we got there?
No, because I think when you take a look at lot size across the neighborhoods, some areas can support certain size because you're still allowing, you know, parking, because maybe there's the street parking. Denser areas don't have that. Some of the areas, you know, how much green space is remaining. I mean, those things are definitely going to be different. I would want more information from the city as far as, you know, across, you know, what the average lot area is by neighborhood, so that we can have an informed decision, would this fit? Mm-hmm. Or, you know, are we even going to be, if this is something that we want to try to achieve, if we don't have that informed decision about how this is going to impact particular neighborhoods, we don't even know if, like, some of the recommendations we're going to have will just negate an entire neighborhood anyway, because they're not going to be able to meet based on if we go a certain size, will they have the land, or, you know, there's a lot of different things that, to me, I felt like I had an opinion and I was informed on this. This came out, and now I kind of feel like I don't have a good handle how these decisions are going to be impacted. And I don't feel comfortable making those kind of recommendations unless I have an opportunity to go back and read things and reflect and do my research and have different information to know how those impacts are.
Yeah.
Happy Valley is a different area than Seahome or York or the Leonard Street areas. I mean, if you, topography, lot size, I'm assuming that they have variances compared to these other neighborhoods. And so if we're going to be impacting these other neighborhoods, I want to be more informed about those so that we can have an enlightened discussion about those impacts and decide the detail. Mm-hmm. Because we can't get into the detail unless we really know the neighborhoods we're impacting mm-hmm. on it, I feel.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Steve, and then Phyllis, and then Iris, you had a comment.
Yeah, I would support attacking this on a citywide basis, but I'd also like to say one size fits all is very, very difficult mm-hmm. for the different neighborhoods that we have. So I don't know what you gain from what I just said.
I think it's just what Lisa said, which is it takes a lot more thought.
It's very difficult, but I do think let's talk about entire city. Let's quit messing around and get to the heavy load here.
Thank you. Phyllis?
Well, I was just thinking, that if we move forward with the entire city model, I mean, I think that's good. It'll probably be simpler in a way when we're applying it. There'll be less confusion. But are there building developments around that would have CCNRs that would disqualify this kind of, even if the city made choices, which would, I was going to use the word trump, which would take precedence, the CCNRs or the city codes?
I'm sure there are CCNRs that wouldn't allow this.
Yeah.
Those are private agreements between the people who purchase a lot in a house in a subdivision. They're not something that the city enforces or
Okay.
is involved in. We enforce the rules that we have. If someone violates a CCNR, it's up to the homeowners association to do something about that. That's not something the city gets involved in.
Thank you.
I think one thing that I would like
Oh,
to
yeah,
add on
sorry.
that, because I know that topic has come up a lot in past discussions, and we actually had a case in the early 2000s for an ADU permit that we issued the permit. There was discussion and comments about private CCNRs. My recollection of that case is that our decision was appealed to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner upheld our decision, and that decision was appealed to Superior Court. And Superior Court also upheld the decision based on the fact that the way that the CCNRs were written and the way that the codes were written suggest that it's still a single-family lot because it's accessory to single-family. So that appeal, my recollection was that Superior Court also upheld that decision that the CCNR did not apply in that case. But that was specific to those CCNRs and the rules at that time.
Iris, do you have a comment?
Yeah, maybe I was misreading this, but I understood that I was looking at this as a citywide thing the whole time, because if each of these proposals or each of these changes were then to be if part of it was to be allow detached ADUs in single-family zoned areas on a per neighborhood basis, it wouldn't mean that we'd go through and make all of these changes every time. So either way, each of these points is a citywide conversation, because it says right at the top, change is applicable citywide. It's just that the where allowed is that currently what the proposal was is that it would be allowed on a per neighborhood basis. And what I was saying is that I would recommend that we change that to citywide. But either way, I think I was looking at these proposed changes citywide, and I see no reason why we shouldn't go through and talk through them tonight, and that's the lens we should be looking at.
It's a good point. I guess that's probably how the city saw it too, right? These would be implemented citywide, except that the only neighborhood that they'd be implemented in technically would be Happy Valley. But then if another neighborhood came along, we wouldn't rewrite the ADU regs for that neighborhood. We would just adopt that neighborhood into these rules. Is Iris reading it correctly?
Yeah, that was the
Yes.
intent.
Okay.
It's
And there may
perhaps
have been.
unfortunately worded, but
Well,
that
I
was
think
the
it's more
intent.
just like how you approach it. Maybe when you sit down, like it sounds like Lisa didn't approach it that way, and I kind of didn't. I understand what you're saying. It makes sense to me. I just hadn't thought it through that way. We're not going to get into these details tonight because we need to provide the public an opportunity to comment on all this. I'm sure they have a lot to say about what we've been talking about. But I think we as a body need to be aware that this is a significant change from what staff has been working on. And so if we make that recommendation, it alters the dynamic of this ordinance dramatically, and it changes what staff has to do, and we have to be cognizant of that. And it might require us to have additional meetings beyond the one work session we talked about before a public hearing, because while the rules do apply everywhere, it's not what I think staff was planning for the past however many months you've been working on this. And I'm not saying that we can't go a different direction. We can, but I'd just be curious a little bit how that might impact staff's work.
Well, we'll support you in providing you whatever information you need to get comfortable to make your recommendation. So if it takes a little additional time.
I mean, yeah, do you need more time in that scenario? Does that change the whole dynamic
I
of your
don't-
process?
Initially, I don't think so. I think we were going to come back in a month with the next work session. So I think that's enough time. It is a significant change, but the sooner we know about it, if that's your direction, the better we can prepare you.
I think that if that's the direction we're going, we should make that decision now and then not get into the details. And that would give the public and staff effectively a month to consider that. And so that when we come back to this, the public will have had an opportunity to think about that big change as well. And that might change the way they comment. I think that would be appropriate. It would not be appropriate to wait until the next work session, then make that decision and leave everybody hanging as to whether or not that's the direction we're going. So I kind of feel like we've talked about this quite a bit. We should make a decision tonight, and then we should table our discussion and give staff an opportunity to make any changes if that's the direction we go, and then take public comment and move toward that. If anybody has comment on that or disagrees, I'd like to hear that.
No, I agree with it. I think when you look back at all the public information to date, I think they were all speaking on a citywide basis.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any question as I read them.
Okay.
Anyway, if I make, for my own sanity, I'd like to make one quick comment. In the matrix on page 19, it addresses, there's a focus group, comments, illegal units, unsafe units, etc. Staff comments. The city's new rental registration and inspection program will help address illegal and/or unsafe units. And that's the basis in which I spoke earlier, and I believe that that was correct. So I just wanted to set the record.
Yeah, you're right, Steve.
And just to add on that, these comments are from 2015, early 2015, and they might predate the passage of the rental registration program.
No, I think what Steve's saying is that staff said that the rental registration was going to address legal units, and then staff said, no, it's not intended to do that. So there's just, that's why he spoke to that.
I'm just saying there's a timing issue from when that comment was made, and then as that was actually passed and legal reviewed it, they probably realized that was not possible.
Yeah. So I don't know if we need a motion to do this, or if it's, I don't think it's a motion. I think it's just a direction that we need to agree or disagree to. And so what I'd like to do, and this is, I don't know if procedurally this is the right way to do it, because this is a unique situation we haven't been in before. But if someone's interested in making that recommendation formally, I'd like them to do that. And then I'd like us all to share our opinion on that through a yay or nay process. It's not a motion. It's just a straw vote, in a sense, how we deal with this. So I'm not going to move that forward, Iris.
So I would recommend that on the changes proposed for the ADU standards in the where allowed section, that the city pursue allowing single-family detached ADU, or allowing detached ADUs in detached ADUs in a single-family zoned area across the city.
All right. So that's the proposal. Thank you. That's what we have been discussing. I'd like everybody to share their opinion on that with a yay or nay, and then that will drive the direction of our next meeting, and I guess to a certain degree the work staff will do. So all those who support Iris's recommendation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. You were right, Lisa.
And let's keep in mind that that's preliminary direction to staff.
Sure.
You don't make a final recommendation until you've had a hearing and you have findings of fact to deal with and so forth, and you've heard from the public. It's
Of
just
course.
preliminary direction to us. I just want that to be clear for the public as
Sure,
well.
and also, I mean, we may engage now in that discussion and determine through that engagement that we don't think that that's what we want to do. It's just making it clear to everybody, I think, and staff as well, that that is the direction that the majority of the body wants to go in. And that still, like Iris, like you said, that still means we have to go through each of these issues, and maybe we'll have a better discussion about some of these issues that you brought up, Lisa, because everybody's aware that we're looking at it in a broader sense, not just Happy Valley. Garrett?
Just when staff are now taking this back, I think as we're looking at, these proposed modifications, knowing that we're talking about these citywide, I think a lot of the concerns that people are going to have in their neighborhoods, which are valid concerns, we can address through design review process and through some level of engagement with neighbors. Because this is a unique form of infill. It is literally your neighbors and your backyards. So we don't want to lose sight of that. But I think we have to do what we're doing and look at this on a citywide whole. I think that's all the comment that I see. That's what people want to talk about. And logistically and just being able to pull this off, doing 26 of these is not going to work. So I think as you work forward with your next proposal, think of design review and think of the structure of involvement and what's reasonable but is still predictable. And I think we could come up with a good compromise.
Well, we'll get
a lot
into the
these
weeds
issues.
of all that as we go through
Yeah.
each of these specific issues. Lisa?
I would like you to take a look at some of our neighborhoods that have smaller lots and see, as far as if it is reduced down to 5,000, a percentage that would be able to comply with that. So if we have lots that are 4,000, you know, a little bit above, like what's the percentage within those neighborhoods? Not, you don't have to get down to 33.3 type thing, but just some kind of idea for spread, how many neighborhoods would be able to support that
Yeah.
by size.
And I would encourage all the commissioners to, over the next month, as we move to our next meeting, if you have thoughts regarding how you want specific questions answered, to forward them on to staff and share them with the commission so we're all aware of that. And we'll get into those details now. The next meeting now, we can talk about each of these items, design, lot size, issues like dispersion, and work. We're still going to work through those one by one. It's just going to be in a slightly different context. So, okay, so with that, Chris?
Just a point of clarification. So when I got off cue, when the screen shut off up there, I see that I missed a couple of slides, and specifically regarding Happy Valley. And so you're right, these changes proposed by staff, they're intended to apply citywide, so that for detached accessory dwelling units, when they were allowed in multifamily zones, these would apply to those multifamily zones. Except for the Happy Valley neighborhood, on the third page of the staff proposals, this should have been labeled differently. This is Happy Valley's proposal on the third page, and this outlines how they would differ from staff's proposal. Happy Valley was basically taking it a step further and creating more flexibility on how ADUs could be accomplished in their neighborhood. So probably the one that stands out the most, for example, is the detached ADU size. That could be, currently it allows up to 40% of the size of the primary residence. Staff is proposing 50%. Happy Valley is proposing that the ADU could be 90% of the size of the primary residence.
So I think what we should do is, at the next work session, if staff could be prepared to discuss those instances where the Happy Valley program differed from the citywide recommendations, and then identify those for us so we don't miss those, and then we can have a discussion about where we all as a body fall on those particular issues. Because that's a really good point. But if you could make sure that you identify those for us for the next meeting, so we can try and bridge that gap. Okay, thanks. Okay, well, I really want to thank everybody up here because that was an interesting discussion, and I think this is going to take a lot of work, and so we're going to have to carry forward with another meeting and potentially another meeting after that, and work through it. So I think with that, I want to close that discussion for tonight, and again, I appreciate everybody's comments, and open it up to the public for comment. And again, like Garrett said, like Greg said, we're going to have more opportunities for public comment. So I'd like to just list off the first three people, have you come down to the microphone. You can share your name. I'll kind of prime people as we go. I'd like people to try and keep their comments relatively short if possible, 2 to 3 minutes. At this time, you'll have an opportunity to provide written comment to us again on numerous occasions and oral comment. There's a few more. And that way everybody who signed up gets a chance to speak, because it's important that everybody's voice gets to be heard, even if it's just for a few minutes. And I'll give you a heads up when you're running out of time. So With that, Shannon Maris, James Peterson, and Teresa Williams are the first three speakers in that order. And please don't forget to share your name and address.
Ready? My name is Shannon Maris. Address is 1814 Donovan Avenue. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And after listening to, well, I'll give you some background. I'm a residential designer, so I'm on the front lines of the requests. And for the last 15 years, this has been one of the most popular things that have been asked for with my clients. And I've been having to tell them, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. And there are some very real issues. I have not talked to any developers. I have not talked to any students. These are all family members who are looking for housing for other family members, or they're waiting to retire and hoping to move to a smaller home, all of the reasons that were talked about in the matrix. But I have names and faces for all these people. So those are the people that are waiting and not getting any response. And the 2008 infill toolkit was a focused attempt to try and get the detached ADUs in place, and that pretty much defaulted to multifamily. So I would like to correct that. We've been trying to get this through for almost 10 years. So that's a bit disappointing. And so I'm speaking as an advocate for all of my people and clients that are wanting these things and can't. And then after, I also want to clarify that it's important to me that it's owner occupied. I think that's a huge thing to maintain. And then after listening to this, I don't deny that there are issues in other neighborhoods, and I think there are trust issues, and I think that's a separate issue. I think there's enforcement issues, and I believe that's a separate issue. But if you're waiting until all of the because of X or because of Y or because of this we're not moving on, you're going to create exactly what you don't want, which is people finding a way to deal with housing, and they're going to do it in an illegal way, and it's going to continue because it hasn't stopped. Just because you haven't made the rules for it, people are still going to build them because the need is there. There's a need for housing. There's a need for family members. And now there's no rules even to provide for that. So the only option is illegal. Thank you.
Thank you. And just real quick, Iris reminded me, thank you, that if you're up in the upper deck, you can use the microphone up there. You don't have to walk all the way down to the front here. And I think there's just a button to turn it on. Is that right, Heather? So just make sure you press the mic button at the bottom of the speaker, and the red light's on if you're up top and you want to speak. So James?
My name's James Peterson, 5 Sunnyside Lane. I'm the president of Homes Now, Not Later. We're a nonprofit that builds tiny homes for the homeless. We've already built 2. We're in the process of building our 3rd one. Our first 2 didn't have restrooms, but they were attached. They were in the backyard of a house that they had 24-hour access to. Why ADUs are so important to us is because we can house working homeless. We can house people that already have incomes, but they can't afford rent. So we're looking to bring it to Billingham. We're having great success out in Lumley. We've already housed, with our 2 homes, we housed 4 people because we put 2 single people in that left room in a shelter for a mom and her kids. Now we're building this next one that does have water, sewer, and electric, and it's up to code. It's on Lumley because we couldn't do it in Billingham. We want to come to Billingham and help solve homelessness. It's not about making money. It's about housing homeless. I'm tired of people saying, I'm sick of the homeless downtown, but they don't want to do anything. We want to do something. We want to build. We're sitting on money right now that has been donated from private donations. We don't take taxpayers' money, but we can't build here. And it's pretty sad that we want to build and we want to house homeless people. So I hope that this goes through because I think it will help us out. Our buildings aren't huge, 80% of 1,000 feet. Wow, I'm thinking, wow, it's a big house. Ours are 8 by 10, and the one we're building now is 10 by 18. So 180 square feet. And it'll have a bathroom, a shower, electric, and the kitchen. So hopefully this goes through. We're not out here to run a bed and breakfast. We're out here to house homeless people, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Hey, excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry. I know that you are supportive of certain comments, but we can't have any audience commentary, positive or negative, just out of fairness to every speaker, okay? Thank you. So Teresa Williams, Rod Burton, and Doug Gustafson. I apologize in advance if I butcher anybody's name. So Teresa's up next. I'm assuming a few people have left. If Teresa's not here, we'll move to Rod. All right.
My name is Rod Burton. I live at 238 North Forest Street in Bellingham. I live in a neighborhood that is a mix of single-family and multi-family. I live on a block that's all single-family with across the street is the South Hill Apartments, and on the other side of the alley it's all single-family, but there are quite a few accessory dwelling units there, some of which are not permitted probably, but I don't know. Nobody causes any problems, so it's not an issue for me. I have a legal ADU at my house, which I've had for about 10 years, I believe, and it's been great. You know, the income has been great. It's good to be able to provide a reasonable rental unit for somebody. My tenants stay for years and years because it's a good place. So I think I'm very supportive of ADUs citywide. I think allowing the detached ADUs citywide in owner-occupied single-family situations is a great idea. I'd be very supportive of that. The permit and construction issues were not a problem for me at all. I mean, the city was very helpful. I don't remember having to pay a whole lot of money, but maybe that's because I did it so long ago. And maybe there's more fees now. And between the Restore and, you know, other deals, I did a lot of the work myself, so actually doing it was not very costly. I think you should apply these things citywide and not have it be a neighborhood by neighborhood issue, or an issue where the neighborhood has to go through some kind of legislative process to get it into their neighborhood. But I think these rules should be applied citywide. In my situation with an attached ADU, according to the realtor, it adds zero value to my house, because essentially I took 2 bedrooms and turned them into an apartment. So I turned a 3-bedroom house into a 1-bedroom house.
About 30 seconds, Rod.
Okay.
Sorry.
I have a question about the height limit suggestion. I wondered about how feasible carriage house type detached ADUs would be if you had a neighborhood with, you know, peaked roofs. Would you be able to actually put an ADU on top of a garage and have enough square footage and enough ceiling heights to do that if you were limited to 28 feet height total? Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rod.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Doug. I'm technical director of Homes Now. Jim just spoke. Basically, our goal is to end homelessness in Whatcom County, and through our travels of actually meeting different homeless people, we found that there's a lot of homeless people that they work full time, but they work minimum wage. I mean, add it up. Let's say you make like $10 an hour times 40 hours a week. You know, $400 times 4 weeks, that's, you know, $1,600. So, you know, some of these apartments are going for $1,000 or $1,200 a month. And so there's definitely a housing crisis in Bellingham. I mean, I've lived here for 10 years. I live in the Puget neighborhood, so right near Civic Field. And the prices for rentals are a lot higher than they were when I first moved here 10 years ago. I probably wouldn't be able to afford, I still have the rental rates I did from 10 years ago now. So if I was just starting off moving here, I probably wouldn't be able to afford it. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of people you walk by on the street that you wouldn't know are homeless because they clean up good and they sleep in their car or whatever. But when the rents get more and more expensive, it's just inevitable that you're going to have more people on the street. And so basically, I support detached dwelling units being more readily available and especially citywide. I think that the enforcement thing, I think that the reason why that might be a problem in some cases is because maybe the process is too complicated or it's too much of a hassle, and then it's also not strongly enforced, so people kind of just feel like they can get away with it. I would say, yeah, sure, you should enforce it, but you should make the rules themselves very simple and straightforward and easy to follow to deal with that concern, so that you can have a win-win situation where A, it's easier to get started with it, but also B, it's straightforward and not annoying or too complicated to figure out for a regular person.
About 30 seconds, Doug.
Oh, okay, yeah. So in order to, we've been able to build 2 homes for $3,500 per home. We could for an 8x10, we could definitely build them bigger. But basically, I wouldn't mind if it was in my backyard. I wouldn't mind if it was in my neighbor's backyard. I see it as one solution of many. In single residential areas, this is like land or grass that wouldn't be used for anything, and you could actually use it for something useful and give somebody affordable rent, provide supplemental income for you if, say, you... so I had more to say, but that was...
That's okay. If you're in the middle of a thought, please feel free to finish it. It's just
yeah,
a reminder.
yeah.
Just a reminder that your time's up.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So I was just saying that I think it's important to give people more options, and you might get some of the concerns people are talking about in terms of short-term rentals and stuff like that, but you're also going to get a lot of other stuff that's not any of those problems, and you're basically just giving homeowners more options if you allow this, whereas right now they have fewer options. It's like, why have your own land if you can't do anything on it? I don't know. That's my thought.
And also, folks who have a lot of thoughts on this, remember, if you get halfway through your spiel, come back to the next meeting and do the second half, okay? Or write it in. I mean, the written comments are great because we get to absorb them for a period of time before the meeting. So I really value written comment. Not that I don't value oral comment.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I did send a written comment.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah.
So the next 3 speakers are Emma, and I'm going to mess this up, Bigon Giari, and Jason Bourne and Wendy Scherer. Jason Bourne. Jason Bourne is signed up. So Emma, and then Jason, and then Wendy.
Go ahead.
It looks like Emma might have not.
My name is Jason Bourne, and it was my name first.
Thank you.
I had a bunch of good stuff to say. Basically, I came to, I live at 605 West Maryland Street.
Thank you.
And I came to advocate for detached ADUs, but after hearing the discussion here, I feel like we're in pretty good hands. I feel like you guys talked this thing up one side and down the other, and you're definitely not done. And I'm proud of seeing the breadth of discussion, so I don't feel like I need to say anything else. I'll continue to be involved, but thank you.
Thank you. So Wendy, and then Rosa has a hyphenated last name, Rice, and then Mark Sherman, and then Derek Long. And I know some of these people won't be here, so we'll just continue to move along. Wendy?
Okay, I'm Wendy Scherer, 1905 Larrabee, and I've written 2 letters on Tuesday and sent them, so you've probably hopefully read them, but
Thank you.
this is a little bit more information. So we worked diligently for the last 2 years, not 1 year, Chris, 2 years as a committee. A lot of the people from our Happy Valley Neighborhood Board and Housing Committee worked tirelessly to look at all the different models around the country and around the Northwest, and we realized Vancouver, BC, and Portland and Seattle, and now for 1 year Ferndale has their detached ADU agreement, and they got it done in 1 year, by the way. Anyway, but we worked diligently to develop some insights about our housing crisis in our neighborhood. So if you look at next door, some of our neighborhoods, people are always trying to get into our neighborhood, and we can't, there's no housing. There's just no housing left. And I've been through 3 different comprehensive plan updates since I was a planning student here in '73 in our neighborhood, and we just have to add more diverse options to our neighborhood. We looked really carefully at our neighborhood, and the planning commissioners have this, but we looked at the current zoning, and at the current zoning we had a huge chunk of single family, which is in yellow. But in reality, Chris, where's the other one? But in reality, it's not all single family. Back in the 70s, when I was a permit, I worked in the permit clerk center here. It was Whatcom County City together here. And then in the 80s, we allowed conditional uses for apartments and duplexes in the single-family zone. So this is from a tax assessor's point of view. If you look at your own neighborhood from the tax assessor's point of view, and Chris Behe at the City Hall can give you this map, you realize that it is an eclectic neighborhood. It's not a historic neighborhood, but the single-family zone is already full of apartments and duplexes. So it's not like you're adding something to a sacred single-family zone neighborhood. So we figured out, looking at all the infill toolkits, which never got applied to the single-family area, that we would try to pick the low-hanging fruit. So that's why we went with our pilot program. So since we're having so much demand with families that have lived here for many years and their parents are aging out, I'm a grandma now, we need ADUs and detached ADUs and smaller lot size and the urban infill toolkit in the single-family zone. So I just wanted to say, get your running shoes on, because we want this to happen citywide, but mostly in our neighborhood faster. And if we can accelerate whatever process, we have people waiting for permits right now. Shannon has designs for permits for detached ADUs that we're ready to put in, and we're just waiting for it. So, we've got
10
the money.
seconds.
So,
Oh, sorry.
okay.
Thank
That's
you.
bad.
Okay, so Rosa, but it looks like maybe Rosa's not here. And then Mark Sherman, Derek Long, and Dan Ramson.
Yeah, hi. My name is Mark Sherman. I'm 1470 Grant Street. I'm in the York neighborhood. And I just wanted to point out, as has been pointed out a little earlier, that this map is actually fictional. And it has 2 ADUs in the York neighborhood. I talked to, at the dedication of the Harriet Spinell Park, I talked to some folks from Samish. They did an informal run through of their neighborhood and inventoried, I believe it's something like 27 ADUs. Now, so if you're going to use, this is not a map to use as a planning tool, because it doesn't reflect the reality. Now, Rick Sepler told us in the ADU Focus meeting that it is very difficult to do an accurate inventory because of the legalities involved. But in order to plan for growth, we have to know what is actually extant, what exists in Bellingham neighborhoods right now. And for neighborhoods to be participating in the planning and of what happens in their neighborhoods, we need to figure out some way to make a map that actually reflects reality. If we're going to plan for growth, we need to know what's actually there. And pointing out that, well, we can't legally go through, and determine through the courts what's happening doesn't mean that we're off the hook for figuring out what is actually happening. So I just want to encourage, before you actually make citywide changes, you need to know what the composition of ADUs in every neighborhood is to some extent, to have some kind of accuracy happening. And I just want to encourage that.
Thank you, Mark. So we had Derek Long, and then Dan, and then Hill Cummings. Any of those folks here to speak? Okay. Colin Middleton. Is there a Colin Middleton here? I see some people coming down. Doesn't look like it, though. Ken Mann, Jonas Stinson, and Dean Fearing. Oh, sorry. Dean. I don't see Ken. Is there a Colin Middleton?
Hi, I'm Dean Fearing, 1303 Commercial Street. I'm the Executive Director of Colchian Community Land Trust. We provide affordable home ownership opportunities for hardworking families here in Whatcom County. It's been mentioned several times tonight that we do have a housing crisis going on right now. I think that's very apparent with what housing prices are doing. And so I think the infill or the ADU ordinance would be a great way to allow some infill opportunities that have been discussed tonight. I like the idea of having some incentives for people to do affordable ADUs in their backyards. Maybe reducing the fees for those ADUs would be a great idea if they were for, you know, people with good jobs at 100% or below of area median income would be a great incentive. Possibly some other ideas to help create some affordable housing. It's a great way for our buyers to stay in their homes if they can build an accessory dwelling unit. It's a great way for our buyers to age in place. I know that's a big concern for a lot of our homeowners. They want to stay in their house, and then of course, you know, places for their children to stay in the community too. So I'd love to see this citywide, as you discussed. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Okay, so Rose Lathrop, Kristen Johnson, and Mona Leichner are the next three on the list. Like Rose is, you gonna stay up there? All right.
I'm doing it. Oh, it's on. Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Rose Lathrop. I'm at 2713 Mackenzie Avenue, Happy Valley. And I just wanted to say I am also a Sustainable Connections Green Building and Smart Growth Program Manager. And so I have both a sort of a professional and a personal need for ADUs in our community. Personally, I live on a 10,000 square foot lot in Happy Valley. I am going to be an empty nester here in the next year, and would love the opportunity to have an ADU in my backyard. I would be able to live in that and then also be able to rent out my house at an affordable rate and pay for my daughter to go to college. So there's the social, the environmental, and the economic benefits to ADUs. It's not going to solve our housing crisis, but it's certainly a really important tool. And I really love that you guys are talking about doing this citywide. One of the things as a former developer is having things that are simple and easy to understand. So I worked with single-family homeowners building homes for years, and the complications of the tedious rules and regulations make it very challenging. So anything you can do to simplify and make it easier, whether that's the number of people that are allowed in the units, heights, just simplifying it as much as possible and making it streamlined so that everybody can understand and be able to know whether it's something that they can do on their lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Kristen, and then Mona, and then Chelsea Farmer. Any of those? Yeah.
I'm Mona Leichner, 2821 Ellis Street. I completely agree with Garrett and Iris. I think it still isn't clear to me actually from the city when I read the materials if the detached units were only specific to the pilot project in Happy Valley or if they were suggesting that citywide with Happy Valley being somewhat different. I think it's ludicrous not to, again, as many have stated, have this citywide, detached, attached. I think by how it has been as attached, many of the neighborhoods that we're talking about are historical neighborhoods that have garages in the back of the properties, and to try to have an attachment to the house to make it a legal ADU it doesn't fit the neighborhood. It doesn't look good to add on some sort of enclosed accessory to the main house just to make it legal. And I also agree, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, the last woman, is having things more user-friendly so that people can actually, for the city to say we're going to make this happen but then throw up so many roadblocks is creating our illegal problem also. The more roadblocks that are thrown up, the more illegals get built, I do believe. And I think besides looking at the design and the actual property and, you know, working with the city on that, I think we do need to look at other jurisdictions. And I've been to meetings in the past before, and if you look to Portland, and I was just looking up, and many of you have maybe read through, they did do a survey on their ADUs back in 2013-14, something like that, and they are known to be in the nation the most progressive as far as ADU development. Even as they go as so far as waiving some of the permitting fees, if you can imagine that. And they still say that nonetheless, presently only 1% of eligible residential properties have been developed into ADUs. So I think this concern, it's a valid concern, but I don't know that it's based on fact. The concern that suddenly our single-family neighborhoods are going to become these multi-dwelling neighborhoods. I don't know that that's a valid concern based, if you look at other jurisdictions that are so much more liberal than we are.
About 20 seconds. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
What
About
was-
20 seconds.
Okay, thanks. And also with the parking, I know that in the past it has been one stall that is, I like if they're adding language to look at that on a case-by-case basis. If there's ample street parking and that can be shown and proven, then accept that and waive that parking. Let's make it a more friendly way to get this ball rolling. And let's not do it neighborhood by neighborhood. It's taken 20 years to get 107 built, 5 a year. And if we have to come back neighborhood by neighborhood, we're probably all going to be gone at that point. Somebody else is going to be talking about it. I mean, seriously, if you think about it. So
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you.
Okay, so we had Chelsea, and then Matt Petrol and Alex McLean are the last 3 people on the list. Obviously, anybody else who wants to speak can speak. You just wait until after Alex has spoken, if he ends up speaking. So, Chelsea?
Hi, my name's Chelsea Farmer. I live in the Birchwood neighborhood. I have a 20,000 square foot lot. And I agree with what the last woman said, is I really don't think that a lot of people are just going to suddenly be building. Although I can't, I won't be, but I'd like to be able to. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is if it's something that you're opposed to, something that I want to point out is your neighborhood isn't the only thing that keeps you in Bellingham. It's a lot of other things that that apply to that. And one of those things are the art. So I come from a restaurant background. I worked at Deanna's, and I loved working there because I worked with a subculture of people who work in restaurants. They're often doing other things. They're artists and musicians and actors, and supplement their incomes by working in restaurants. And I owned a restaurant for 12 years. And there are people that are making really good money and can't afford rent, but there are no places for them to live. And I had an employee, this started a couple years ago, where she got out of her relationship and she needed to move out of her house. And there was no place for her to live except out on Chuckanut. And she biked from Chuckanut to Whatcom Community College back downtown to work because she works nights. There are no buses that go out there. And it wasn't that she didn't have the money for a place to live or she couldn't pay rent. There was just no inventory. So I really support this. I think, yeah, there are problems, but they're just easily addressed. So, I mean, not easily, but you're doing a good job. So thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. So I had Matt, and it looks like Petrol, and then Alex McLean. If either of those folks would like to speak. Looks like we have somebody coming down. This Matt or Alex?
Alex.
Alex, all right.
Yeah, Alex, I live in Happy Valley on 32nd Street. I'm also a member of the Happy Valley Neighborhood Association. As Wendy said, Happy Valley has worked on this for quite a while. And I think it's awesome that you're considering going citywide, but I do wonder if you could quarantine Happy Valley because we've got some specifics that we're interested in. I'm also, frankly, just a little nervous once you blow it open citywide, you're going to have certain neighborhoods that are going to come in and try and torpedo it, because, some neighborhoods are going to freak out, other neighborhoods are going to be super awesome with it. So we're talking about the pilot program for Happy Valley. Maybe you could compartmentalize that proposal as compared to jumping into the citywide aspect. Just floating that out there. My interest, besides being on the board and active in green building and just a building goon in general, I like building stuff. I've got a half-acre lot smashed up against the freeway there on 32nd Street. In the last year, we've had 5 houses built on 32nd Street, and we've also got 30 units of apartments coming in. And as somebody else said, I don't have control over that, but I've got this half-acre lot with a house, kind of stupidly put right in the middle of it in 1968. They were smoking something. So I cannot divide the lot, and I've also got 2 separate parking garages, or garages. I don't know why they built 2. I want to make one into a super pimp green detached ADU. As many people have already commented, there's a lot of interest in the building community, especially the green building community, and I think this would be a really good opportunity to create kind of green laboratories for these small houses, these ADUs. Because your investment is not as severe as a brand new house. You could do a green roof, you could do solar panels, you could do, you could ask people to do low impact development on these things, and it's not going to be catastrophic. And in that respect, it might be a good thing to nudge people and reduce the number who might flood in and try and, do, yeah. So
Alex,
also
about
the
20
other thing
seconds,
is
Alex.
owner occupied. Owner occupied. Woohoo!
About 20.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the last person on the list. And if there's anybody else who'd like to comment, just let's come on down. Either stay up top if you want to speak up top, or come on down and line up against the side here. And looks like you were up there first, and then we'll move to Linda. And looks like we've got some more, so maybe we'll go back and forth with people. And please remember to state your name and address for the record.
Hi. Thank you for the work you do. My name is Maggie Bates. I live at 1115 22nd Avenue, which is in Happy Valley, but that didn't bring me here. What brought me here is I'm a residential designer. I work for A1 Builders and Adaptations Design Studio, a worker-owned cooperative. We see people often who have developed the illegals, and we have to deal with the rules and regulations. And I guess I'm up here to recommend that when you're thinking about enforcement, to make it easy for people who are illegal. So because people who develop illegal dwellings don't do it through a reputable builder. And if they don't do it through a reputable builder, they're not going to go by the residential code, which covers egress, fire separation, all those kinds of things. So I think that you should address both the illegals and the legals at the same time, so that people's residences across the board, across the city, are all safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's jump down and then back up. So, Linda.
Linda Twitchell with the Building Industry Association. We have no policy on ADUs, but we have strongly supported the idea that there is no silver bullet for the housing problems we have, and that we need variety and size and options. I think you guys are heading in a great direction. I really appreciate many of the comments tonight. The idea of incentivizing through possibly reduced fees might make sense, because building fees, as some of you know, to create a separate residence, regardless of size right now, can be $20,000 or more. And if you're building a small ADU, that can be self-defeating right there. So that's certainly a thought. We are talking about citywide approach. I think that's great. What you might want to do is consider allowing neighborhoods to come in if they want something that's even more diverse as in Sudden Valley's suggestion for, you know, different numbers or whatever. I mean, perhaps you'd want to be setting a citywide minimum or something, and then allowing neighborhoods to come in to approach you for basically pilot projects, but doing it slightly even more so. The one comment I have about enforcement is that enforcement is kind of a separate issue. I think that's correct. We have, for instance, illegal duplexes and apartments, but we don't stop allowing people to build apartments and duplexes. You know, so there is a division problem there. But I also think if there's any way of incentivizing people and simplifying matters so that folks will come in and do it correctly or correct an illegal situation, that would be a wonderful addition to what we're doing here. Thank you much.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay. Hi, this is on, I guess.
Yes.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm Diane Foster, 926 Mason Street. And so I have sort of an unusual angle on the whole thing. I'm in Seahome neighborhood, and I believe that in general, we were sort of against the toolbox, the infill toolbox kit back in 2008. Although there's lots of differences of opinions, but and it was mainly because of the design standards. I mean, personally, I didn't like, you know, the toolbox, but I'm looking at, I just spent, you know, 9 months in Seattle having a bone marrow transplant, so I'm seeing those huge changes there, and I grew up in Seattle, and I like historic homes. I like old craftsmen. They're terrible for storage. I mean, you know, they're cut up wrong, so they're not very good. They're not very livable, but I just like them. And I look at my neighborhood in Mason Street, and I see all these old craftsmen that are mostly rentals, and I could see rich people from Seattle moving here, which they are, and they, you know, offer maybe $800,000 to buy one of those and tear it down and put up these huge McMansions. You would not believe what's happening in Seattle. You know, they fill the whole space, so there's no green, there's no bushes, no trees, which we need for our mental health as well as carbon sequestration. And they fill it with these big flat-roofed houses, 20,000 square feet, and 2 people live in it. I mean, I don't want to live in McMansionville, frankly. And so I think detached ADUs are a good idea, because if it means that the people that own those little craftsmen can afford to not have to sell out, I mean, there's nothing saying that they wouldn't anyway, but it might help mitigate that situation as these people move here, and they're moving to my old hometown of Bremerton as well. They're going to, you know, bulldoze that over and take out old houses and build McMansions. That's going to be happening soon as well. I don't know what else we can do to stop it, but it's just another angle to kind of look at it from. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll jump back down here.
I'm Jake Charlton. I live at 1609 Harris Avenue. I'm a software tester by day, so my brain always looks at things and tries to break them. So when I listened to Chris's presentation, there are a couple of things that came to mind. Neighbor permissions at one point was brought up, and I couldn't help but wonder, what is a neighbor? Is it the person who owns the building next door, the person who lives in it if it's a renter? What if the house is vacant or it's a vacation rental? Who do you need to get permission from? And the other, you haven't gotten to it yet, but height limitations. If you're on a steep slope, how do you measure height if, you know, it might be 20 feet high the whole way along, but it's on a 45% grade, so maybe it's a 40-foot difference. Just some clarification could be done there. And I think you're going out about it the right way. You got a good discussion going. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Is there another speaker up top?
Yeah.
Yep, go right ahead.
Joe Jeffrey, 2219 B Street. I've lived in 5 different states across the continent, several states across the world, self-employed, self-made, working class, shoestring budget. And it really frustrates me to hear, housing prices associated with this conversation. I'm 33 years old. I can't even dream of owning a house. I don't know anyone in my generation who can dream of owning a house. We're all renters. I really appreciate that you brought up what a large rental community there is here. I think that there's actually a lot more that just aren't counted in the statistics because we've got no choice. We've got to live somewhere. We work here. This is a great place to be. This is a great place to live, to work, so on and so forth. And, you know, I don't really want to raise my daughter in an apartment complex. We deserve to be able to live in neighborhoods too. You know, we do. We deserve to be able to rent in neighborhoods. And I'm not a bad neighbor, nor is most anyone I know. We interact with our neighbors. We interact with our neighborhoods. We participate in the activities that happen in our neighborhoods, and we deserve that right. It shouldn't just be occupied by the owners. We deserve the right to live here too. And that's all I really want to say.
Thank you, Joe. Let's go down here, and then we'll go back up, because it looks like you're the last speaker down here.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Zach Giffen. I'm the host of a television show called Tiny House Nation. You may have heard of it. And I'm also a resident here in Bellingham. I live at 3221 on Locust Avenue. And I'm also heavily involved with an organization called Operation Tiny Home, where we go around the country and work with different communities, building actually communities of tiny homes for homeless veterans. And obviously that's not what we're talking about. I came here a little late, but I just want to say that I've seen a whole lot more dysfunctional conversation than what I've seen tonight. But I will just add a little perspective coming from someone who talks a lot about this in different parts of the country. There's a lot of different places that are a little ahead in terms of this conversation. We're talking about using Happy Valley as the test subject. Well, we have a lot of test subjects already out there in the country that we can look to and try to get some kind of statistics back on what these policies actually do. And what I will say is that they've tried to implement tiny homes in building codes and zoning a whole lot of different ways. You know, tiny home communities is one thought process. ADUs is another thought process. There's actually cities that have actually opened up tiny homes on wheels to be used as accessory dwelling units. And I would just encourage people, you know, within this conversation to look at what's out there and try to see what where the successes are. And I'll close by basically relaying what has been the findings of most places that try to go down this path of utilizing accessory dwelling units as solutions for affordable housing options, as well as different kind of community factors like what you're referring to. And the findings really are very much in congruency with what was talked about before, where very few of these properties are actually going through with it. So we're having huge discussions all over the country that are really heated about policies that aren't actually creating much.
About 20 seconds.
And so I would just warn you that that's actually been the case. And so now places are going back and reevaluating their policies. And the reason that my belief, this is where it's my belief, the reason that it's not actually taking off and turning into affordable housing options or really solutions for lower income families to move into more affluent areas, which really creates residential diversity, which is a key cornerstone in actually creating this wonderful society that we have, where people can actually move upward in mobility through the economic spectrum based on hard work. The real problem holding it back is that the homeowners that can afford to build an ADU lack the incentive, the financial incentive. And then the homeowners that are struggling, that would love to share their property and relieve some of the cost to their daily life, they can't afford that extra, to take out the extra financing to actually create that ADU. And that is the very reason that it's not taking place. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting.
Good evening. Name's Kevin Ernest. I live in the Newport Apartments on Adams Avenue off of 32nd, so I guess I just happen to live in Happy Valley. I didn't think about that before I came here. It's funny that I follow up this chap who lives on B Street because I'm 26. I'm a letter carrier with the Postal Service. I think I have a really awesome middle-class job. I'm a proud union member, delegate to the Central Labor Council. Yeah, did I hear a here? And I can't, for the life of me, find a house that I can even rent. I live in an apartment that is pretty crappy in my standards. I'm getting married this next June. I'm pretty excited about that. And my fiance, she's a grad student at Western, much more smart smarter than me. She doesn't want to live where I live, where we can afford, because it's dark. She can't have a garden. You know, she loves being able to cultivate plants and all that. If there were affordable ADUs, when we get married next June, we could afford something like that. We could build our home together in a community like the Sunnyland neighborhood, like Happy Valley, like all these other wonderful neighborhoods we have around this great city. But because everything is so darn expensive, where's that rent is too damn high guy, we can't do that. And I had one other thought, though, about this maximum occupancy of people in these ADUs. If I marry my fiance, God bless, and if we do move into an ADU and we have one child, we're at max capacity. Well, if I'm in the Sunnyland neighborhood, I want to live there probably for the next 20-something years. I love the Sunnyland neighborhood. That's where my mail route is. And 2 kids might come along, 3, 4. I mean, I'm Catholic, so God only knows how many kids. So, you know, and I understand at a certain point you can't live in an ADU with 6 kids, but 2 kids, you know, especially if they're the same gender, you could pop them in the other room, stack them on top of each other just fine.
Yep. About 30 seconds. Thank you.
I just, that seems like a funny stipulation we're putting on people, and I don't quite understand the motivation for that, and I hope that through the conversations that there can be room for altering that. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks for adding some levity. Looks like we have another speaker.
Yep, if you want. Okay. My name's Alan Crum, and I live out on Sunset at Racine in a adult living complex, which I hate. I'm 65, and I'm more spry than anybody else in the damn building, and take care of most of them. I would love to be in an ADU, taking care of an older couple that lives in the house or lives in the ADU and I live in the house. There's a definite need for these things, and I think they need to be considered a citywide thing, not neighborhood by neighborhood, or where the neighborhood has to then come to you and say, oh, we want to do it now, give us approval to do it. It needs to be citywide. If you do have any kind of neighbor-kid connection, it becomes not my neighborhood. And the comment about the tiny homes, one of the ladies here said she's got this great piece of property, but she can't afford to do an ADU. Well, you can consider, if you do consider a tiny home as an ADU, portable though, there are people like me that would be willing to do the cost of that ADU and put it on her property. I think there needs to be an allowance for that. It is a big motion, it's a big movement across the country. There are ways to make it like semi-permanent, where you zoning-wise, if you have a tiny home on a piece of property, you require, let's say, a porch be attached to it, so it's not quite so mobile. I mean, different neighborhoods have taken different tacks on this, but the tiny home movement is a good way to create the ADU functionality that is, in fact, portable. One of my problems with the whole thing is the owner occupancy is a great idea, but if I've taken and rented an ADU and I've spent a lot of care and effort in maintaining the yard and helping the people and whatnot, and they pass away, I'm out of a home immediately.
About 20 seconds.
And if it's a tiny house, I can move it. So I want to make sure, please consider that. I think it's very important.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? Looks like we have one more up top.
Nope. All right, my name is Reese Fowler, and I live at 26th and Donovan in Happy Valley. A lot of the similar comments we have tonight, but I'm giving a particular circumstance of where I live. I'm at Bellingham Co-Housing, which is a kind of a test case that happened back in the late 90s or like 2000. And it's been a phenomenal success. You know, a great place to raise kids. And right now we're going through a lot of kind of growing pains because we're getting to that point where the founding members have, you know, their kids have grown up, they're out of the household. You know, a similar story to what we've heard here tonight is that, you know, folks are wanting to downsize, but they want to continue to live at Bellingham Co-housing. The original density for the land that we have is 33 units. So we have 33 units in 10 residential buildings, and they're 2-bedroom up to 4-bedroom. But what we have is folks that would like to downgrade into like a single bedroom or a studio. So adding potential units to Bellingham Co-housing would be really advantageous because it allows families who, you know, we have like, you know, small 780 square foot places with, you know, 2 or 3 kids living with their parents. And they're in the small units because they can't get into the larger units, right? And then the larger units that have 1, 2 people in them, there's nothing small enough for them to go down into. So adding possibly some ADUs that allow us to have more flexibility would be very advantageous. And I think that this, you know, is a great example because we have a microcosm of what the larger community is really feeling, right? With only 72 people on site, you can really look and see how it can work on a, you know, a more tangible scale rather than a whole neighborhood scale. So I just wanted to put that out there that, you know, we're working on the same type of things at Bellingham Co-housing, and we're looking very closely at what develops with the attached ADUs, non-attached ADUs ordinance, and how we can implement that to make life better at Bellingham Co-housing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to comment tonight? Keeping in mind that there'll be additional opportunities to participate. All right. I think with that, I will close the public comment portion of this work session, and I just want to thank everybody who spoke. I know a lot of people left, but hopefully that word will trickle back to them. We appreciate all public comment and written comment as well, so we're going to continue to take it, and I encourage people to continue to participate in the discussion. It's a community-wide discussion. And so with that, I think we'll close the work session component of this meeting, and if everyone could just hang tight for 1 second. We just probably have like a minute of housekeeping so that it's not disrupted by everybody leaving, and then we'll get everybody out of here. I know it's really late, and I also really appreciate everyone staying so late. I'm going to talk to staff and the planning commissioners a little bit about the structure and see if we can set this up next time. So maybe we can take some comment at the beginning, because I feel bad that certain people left, and we were kind of trying to figure out how to handle this, but it may be better to take a period of comment at the beginning. I think we did that with the waterfront, where there was so much comment. We took some at the beginning of the meeting for like a time commitment, and so if you got here early and signed up, you got to speak at the beginning, and then if you didn't, you got to speak at the end. And maybe that'll help, because we want to give everybody that opportunity. And so I guess with that, I just want to check my notes. Do we have anything? Our next meeting is September 21st. Is that right? And it looks like that's on a follow-up meeting on the short-term rental?
Correct.
And is that going to be the only focus of that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And is there anything else that you want to deliver information to us on right now?
The second meeting in October probably will be about ADUs, so we'll be back in a month.
Okay. And for anybody who didn't hear that, that would be the second meeting in October. So about a month from now, we'd have a follow-up meeting on this topic. It'll be another work session. See, planning commissioners have comments? Yeah, Lisa?
Is there anything lined up for the first meeting of October 5th?
Heather's shaking her head, so I guess that means no.
So we can kind of plan on camping.
You can plan on camping, yes.
All right. Good question. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, everybody, again. Thank you, public and staff, and we'll adjourn.